Members, the meeting has resumed. We had concluded the deputants on EC 3.5, and I will now allow for or ask members questions of staff. Okay, so Councillor Carroll, we'll start with you.
Really quick question. My only question is that the part of the plan. The part of the plan I just want to understand where we then situate a program, refugee reception center. There's this concept of the local community agency reach out and then they form a big part of the neighborhood supports. I'm wondering if you could flesh that out for me a bit. It's from existing agencies that do regular settlement work, but they can't serve the refugees in their regular settlement programs? Am I reading that right?
Through the chair, you've touched on a whole bunch of complexities to the discussion. So
that's what I like to do.
It is true that the settlement sector funded through Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada cannot serve individuals who do not have permanent resident status,
right,
or have been determined to be convention refugees. Mm-hmm. We have been working with both the settlement sector, but more importantly, the deputants you heard from this morning were from the Refugee House group of agencies, a group that the city doesn't traditionally work with in the same way that we would the settlement sector. The report before you was developed in partnership with that sector. They were very much at the table. Yeah. And I think the deputations reflected that. The reception center is funded, so council approved funding for that activity in 2018. And we are delivering in partnership with those groups. Mm-hmm. Led by the Red Cross, who operated something called the First Contact Center. So the additional city funding has allowed that community partnership to enhance the services available, and we are continuing to work with them to look at how we can further enhance those services. But it is not delivered by the city, it is delivered by First Contact. Okay. The other issue that I would share with committee is that we really need provincial, federal cooperation and investment to make the kind of vision that Anne was talking about become a reality. It is not the city's mandate, and the city does not have the resources to deliver on that without federal, provincial cooperation and investment. Mm-hmm.
So even if we knew the agencies that could form that, could start that picture that she painted, and then grow it from there, as the way she described it, you can't do that with property tax dollars. You need the other governments to begin to grant the funds that make those agencies able to build it.
That would be my advice to council. Yes, you are correct.
Okay. So our plan really is about knowing who's coming, doing the first parts, and connecting them up. In the neighborhoods where they suddenly are there, in a hotel or whatever, when they are working with local agencies, I understand the confidentiality piece, but to know if there's extra burden on agencies that I'm meanwhile also sending people who are just people in difficult circumstances in the neighborhood. Can the councillor know what agencies we're tapping into and connecting up with the First Contacts initiative of getting those agencies to provide supports?
Absolutely. So any councillor who would be interested in understanding how that service delivery is occurring, we're happy to meet with them and brief them. And I know that The refugee houses would also be very interested in meeting with councillors and sharing their services with them.
Right, right. In my case, I've been reluctant to reach out because I thought, okay, if you didn't come to me in the first place, maybe I'm not supposed to be part of it. But that's actually, it doesn't compromise proceeding with the plan, just to be briefed.
The message behind this plan, in a sense, council has been understandably occupied with the shelter issue, because that is a property tax expense. There are many other elements to successful support for refugee claimants and ultimately successful integration in the City of Toronto. Our access to city services for undocumented Torontonians would come into play. Anyone, including a refugee applicant, has the right to access any city service that isn't otherwise governed by the provincial or federal government. So that policy would come into play. We would have the same expectation of all of our community-based funded agencies for programs that the city is funding.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Carroll, maybe consideration for a second round if you wish. So think about it. But you're good? Okay, fair enough. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you. Just as we look at the continuum of housing care and needs around refugees, just so I understand, the refugee class this is intended to serve, is it, can you just, so is it GSRs, government-sponsored refugees, privately sponsored refugees, or undocumented individuals? Could you, who is this intended to serve as a continuum of care?
The population that this report is focused on is individuals who are asylum claimants.
Okay.
Anyone who is a government-sponsored refugee or a privately sponsored refugee will have access to different kinds of supports. It's asylum seekers who do not have access.
Yes. Okay. So that is when we talk about the 24/7 refugee welcoming center and referral center, and then the flex capacity in the shelter system, but leading into transitional housing. We're talking primarily asylum seekers.
Correct.
Okay.
Otherwise, they're eligible for the same services that any Torontonian is eligible for.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cressy. Councillor Lai.
Chair, to staff. The recommendation here is to adopt the proposed refugee capacity plans as laid out in Appendix A. So does it include that, I just want to make clear, that does it include that to establish a 24/7 refugee claim reception and referral center? Because Appendix A does not have that kind of a recommendation. So you mean the full report, or?
No, and I do understand the confusion in the report. The report is recommending Appendix A, which is the process that city staff and community partners will engage in when there is a increase in flow. Page, I need my glasses, 6 of the report simply advises council of other work that we are doing, other initiatives that we are doing, one of which is the reception and referral center.
So we have it already now? Do we have that center now?
There is a 12-hour-a-day, 5-day-a-week program that has been initiated. Council actually directed that last year. So we're reporting out in this report on an action that council directed in 2018 and delegated authority to me to implement. So this is the report out on that.
So it does not.
It is not a 24/7. We would need provincial and federal investments to make that a reality.
Okay, I'm clear now. The other question I have is that you've mentioned about that we need provincial funding and federal funding to be on site before we can do more. And I think the province has indicated that it's none of their business. And the federal government, that is probably our only resource now. We can actually go and get some funding. Have you guys, have staff actually have any kind of a dialogue or know how we can get some funding from them, or have they, I mean, they've owed us, I think the federal government has owed a hunk of money and they haven't actually paid up yet. So how are you going to approach this for the financial situation on here?
Through the chair, it's not my place to speak to political level conversations. With respect to bureaucratic level conversations, there is regular communication with officials from Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada, and there is a very good relationship, working relationship with our federal colleagues. In addition, Toronto has a signed memorandum of understanding with the governments of Canada and Ontario on settlement. That is a formal intergovernmental table, and it meets quarterly, no less than twice a year. So those dialogues are happening at the staff level.
So through the chair, but those does not include this asylum seeker, do they? For those.
You're correct in that the MOU does not specifically address the needs of asylum seekers, but there certainly, I think all parties are understanding that there is a broad continuum of newcomers, and where we're focused on one part, we end up understanding the issues related to other parts of the continuum, but it is not a specific focus of the MOU.
Thank you. I can just add, Councillor Lai, that the Mayor has been very clear with respect to his ask and through the relationship, intergovernmental relationship to the Mayor's office and the other levels of government, particularly the Government of Canada and certainly to the Province of Ontario. The Mayor is seeking resources through that lens that he has as part of his purview. So I just wanted to add to that. Just one question for me, Mr. Berlinger. This plan is not talking about numbers, is that correct?
That's correct.
It's simply talking about a framework, a structure to be in place. And the reason why I asked you that question, because I know that there are some media interests who've asked me, well, what's the number of asylum seekers that we are planning for? And obviously, I didn't respond. I didn't get a chance to respond back to them, but I just want to make sure I'm clear, because my response would have been, we're not planning for numbers. We want to put a framework in place in order to deal with the issue as it comes about.
And in fact, every refugee movement will be different.
Right.
It will be different in magnitude, the source countries, the pathway by which they find themselves here. So every response will need to be unique to a particular movement, and we can't predict in today's world exactly what movements will.
And it's reflected on page 3, where you talk about the numbers of 10,000 going all the way up to 2018, 55,000. So it's reflected with that. Okay, thank you. Are there any additional questions of staff? Okay, seeing none. Speakers to speak? Councillor Carroll.
Yes, my questions probably seem very awkward because I was asking them in code. I'm really sensitive to this. I don't know if it's as necessary in the core city as it is out there, where we have people settling in and they are getting services, but you tend to find out after the fact. You don't want to draw too much attention to it because they are in fact finding their way into the community that way. You will see it happening. There are social gatherings where I can go and hear success stories, but I also know that what Mr. Chase says is right. The influx is just going to keep coming. The political landscape globally is such that we know that humanitarian crises are not going to suddenly abate anytime soon. And so I'm really happy to see the plan, but I wanted to highlight that I think, sharing a bit with the councillor, there's some housing these folks going on in your community. We're talking to some of your agencies so that they can then reach out and make sure everybody has what they need, helps us plan for needs. Because if we have a non-governmental agency that is beginning to help with this work, beginning to help with on the employment side, on the just sometimes just I have an agency that has done a very quiet and very lovely job of helping moms understand the school system as these kids are placed in the schools around my ward, and sometimes go with them to be advocates. And that is a great thing. It's just that the work they were doing before with other members of my community may be really challenged. And that means I've got to be putting the word out. They need more volunteers. They're doing great work over there. I know you show up at the food bank every Tuesday. What are you doing on Thursday? Those are the types of conversations that we can have with the superstar volunteers in our neighborhood, and try and build the bodies that need to help out with this. On a non-governmental agency basis. The federal ask, I have confidence in the mayor's office, because he's also backed up by the whole big city mayor's caucus across Canada, because ultimately these people may settle anywhere in Canada when we've allowed them to make their home. And so everyone wants us to do the best job possible. So Mayor Tory goes with the whole big city mayor's caucus behind him, an FCM, when he's asking to have supports for this. But that interface with councillors, however diplomatically and confidentially it needs to happen, I think is really important in making sure that we've got our ear to the ground to help get any additional volunteer supports and community supports that can help them do the work. But I will take Mr. Brillinger's offer up. If you want a briefing, just ask for it, for crying out loud, councillor. I hear that loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. Anyone on my right? I know come to Councillor Cressy will be our last speaker on this issue. Okay, Councillor Cressy.
Well, thank you, Chair. I will move the recommendations from staff in the report, and I guess preface it by saying that our city is in so many ways a city of newcomers welcoming newcomers. That is our history, and that is how we came to be who we are, and we are as a city better for it. And every year we continue to welcome around 50,000 permanent residents on an annual basis. But we've seen in recent years an increase in the number of refugees and asylum seekers, people who often have more complex needs. And with the rise of global instability, I think we should expect that we will continue to see that trend upwards in numbers. And so we have, as a city, I'm proud to say, done a fair amount. I mean, we have the Newcomer Settlement Office in the City of Toronto. Not many cities have that. In 2015, we developed a refugee resettlement program. We did so in the wake of the Syrian refugee crisis, but we developed it in the context of supporting all refugees. But I think what this report speaks to so importantly is now, on an intergovernmental basis, this is not on the city alone, the focus has to be not just on sheltering refugees, but housing refugees, and the continuum of care that is required to make that happen, from a welcoming and referral center to creating flexibility within the shelter system, but tailored to the community it needs to serve, and ultimately, of course, to transitional housing. And so I just want to thank staff for the work. I know it is not easy anytime an intergov issue comes about, but to the Newcomer Settlement Office and to SDFA as a whole, I think, and SSHA, we are heading down the right approach here, and I'm looking forward to seeing this program developed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cressy. All those in favour of the item? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving right along, we are now at EC 3.6, noise bylaw review, proposed amendment to Chapter 519, noise. Members, I'd like to ask staff to come forward and to provide a presentation to allow us to frame the matter, to help members and perhaps members of the public to realize where we are as it relates to this proposed noise bylaw. Good afternoon. Whenever you're ready, please let me know. I'll start your time.
All right, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Deputy Mayor, members of council, and members of the public. My name is Carlton Grant, and I'm the Director of Policy and Strategic Support with the City's Municipal Licensing and Standards Division. I'm joined by my colleague, Mark Schraga, Director of Investigation Services, and my colleague, Nagin Shamshiri, who's the Manager of Policy and Planning. Again, we'll try to give you some context on a very complex piece of work, and Mark will get into some of the details as the presentation moves on. Today, what we're proposing is an updated bylaw that reflects our growing and vibrant city. Our aim throughout this very thorough process has been to provide clear, more consistent language that makes it easier to understand, apply, and enforce consistent noise standards across the city. This is 5 years in the making. I want to thank my team, the number of people that have worked on this, the number of members of the public and stakeholders who have come and provided us with input, again, on this very complex and comprehensive issue. This is a very challenging file. It started in 2015. We've hosted over 20 consultations with the public and industry stakeholders, and most recently 5 just in the last couple months. Again, as directed by committee and council, we engaged a third-party facilitator, again, to try to flush out a number of these issues. And they were very progressive and positive discussions. So I also want to let people know the additional research and consultations we've done over and above the public consultation. We've done a technical review of the current and 2016 noise bylaw that we had originally brought forward. We used an independent acoustical engineer firm, and then we had them peer reviewed by another independent engineering firm. So again, it's been looked at from a technical perspective. We also wanted to make sure that it was, we wanted to hear from the public, not just the people we had consulted with, but we wanted to hear from the people of the City of Toronto. And we did a survey with Ipsos Reid to understand public opinion on the issue of noise. We did additional research on looking at what other jurisdictions are doing in this space, and again, extensive consultations. Again, all for the purposes of making the bylaw more quantifiable and objective versus its current subjective form. In 2019, just to highlight, again, we had 5 public consultations built on these 5 areas: power equipment, motor vehicles, amplified sound, construction noise, general noise, and exemption permits, and we engaged over 220 people in those consultations. An additional 300 people provided emails to us directly, and then the survey that I spoke of in the previous slide received 1,001 online interviews, which is statistically significant. What we heard through these consultations was overall support to update the current noise bylaw, to give it greater clarity and objective measures related to noise, and strengthening enforcement so that it's effective. We also heard from participants about the importance of prioritizing the protection of public health. Staff from Public Health are here today as well, and we're very supportive in this work, and we're at all of the consultation meetings with us. On the right-hand side, you'll see what we learned from the public opinion research. And when citizens of the City of Toronto were asked what the 5 biggest issues they were having, they were traffic and congestion, public safety, overcrowding on public transit, housing affordability, the environment. Noise was one as well, and it came in 7th. But it is significant and it does impact a number of people. Overall, 64% of the residents believe that it's a reasonable amount of noise in our city, but that also means that 36% believe it isn't reasonable. So again, there's our challenge. So now I'm going to turn over to Mark to get into the details of our proposal.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Deputy Mayor and councillors. The bylaw we're proposing, there's several improvements we believe that, if adopted, will bring forward for us. One, it'll have added greater objectivity on how we deal with noise. In particular, we're proposing established decibel limits for amplified sound and motorcycles. And these limits that we're proposing have been set based upon recommendations from technical reviews by our consultants, looking at provincial guidelines and other industry standards. We're also providing some better clarity and objectivity around just general noise disturbances, and we're proposing that any unreasonable or persistent noise would be a violation of our bylaw. So that having that clarity about it and objectivity of how we deal with noise will help us from an enforcement perspective, being able to have better successes on enforcement. We're providing improved clarity in the language. There's confusion in the current bylaw, so we are proposing clarity that power devices is not the same as construction devices. Again, this will help with enforcement down the road, having clearer understanding of what the rules are and how they apply. We're bringing into line harmonization of time restrictions on certain types of noise, which the current bylaw has a variety of different time restrictions, which is confusion for the industry, confusion for the public, as well as confusion for our officers doing the enforcement. We're also providing better clarity around city projects and work done by the city is exempt from the noise bylaw. There is already exemptions provided, but we're providing more clarity around that, as well as we're making it clear that the provincial government and federal government, they are by law exempt from the bylaw, but we're again putting that clarity into the language so that the people are better informed. We strive to reach common ground between stakeholders. As Carlton mentioned, this is a very complex file because there's a variety of different competing interests and viewpoints on this. So we wanted to provide, try and strive where we could, common ground. One of those issues that's perhaps one of the more contentious issues for some people is the blanket exemption that exists for continuous concrete pours in construction and large crane work. Currently, the bylaw allows a blanket exemption. The noise bylaw does not apply to that type of work. We are proposing that this work not be provided with that blanket exemption, which no other municipality in Canada has, or even in the large cities in North America. So we're proposing rules around that, but they would still be able to apply for an exemption permit, so they would be still able to carry out the work, but we're trying to put some measures around it to manage and mitigate the impacts. We're also looking to have greater compliance tools. So we're looking to make sure that where a noise exemption permit is applied for, that there's a requirement, perhaps if necessary, that there's a noise mitigation plan, including active monitoring by our officers. And again, it's about managing and mitigating the impacts of the noise on people versus just saying you can make noise at 2 in the morning. We're looking to make sure that everything's done to mitigate the impacts, as well as we're putting in place and proposing higher fines. Our fine structure currently is under the Provincial Offences Act, which is a maximum penalty of $5,000 for a violation. So we're proposing a higher fine under the City of Toronto Act, which would be a maximum fine of $100,000. I just want to point out that would be an extreme situation that if a court was ever to award such a fine, but we find that the $5,000 fine, again, is not in instances where we have blatant violations of the bylaw. That in and of itself would not be a deterrent for people. So the higher fine structure, we believe, would do that. We're aware of the impacts of noise and from a public health issue that's been raised and spoken about numerous times. Toronto Public Health is currently dealing with and working on that issue. They are currently working on a noise mitigation strategy to deal with environmental noises throughout the city. So that is in their realm, and we recognize that, and we're working collaboratively with them and participate with them, but they are the lead on that. We've heard, and I know it's been spoken about before, leaf blowers. Again, there's views that leaf blowers should have an outright ban or restriction on them in the city. We've looked at that issue. We've looked at what other municipalities have done. We are proposing to restrict the hours of use from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., so reducing those hours. but to try and put a ban on place is very challenging for us. There's federal requirements on mandatory labeling on equipment, as well as that would have an impact on current property owners who have their own leaf blowers, industry, companies. So we don't, at this time, we're not recommending such a ban. There's been questions raised about, does the noise bylaw apply to interior commercial construction? It does. The noise bylaw applies to all noise. However, if there's interior construction occurring within a commercial tenanted property, we would not get engaged or take any enforcement action from MLS on that issue. That would be a tenant-to-tenant issue, and that we would direct those tenants to work that through with their lease arrangements and their property owner and/or property manager. But if it's a mixed-use building and there's noise generated from an interior renovation of a non-residential nature, we want to still have the rules in place so we can address those issues and impacts. Motorcycle noise, this is something brand new for us. It's been an issue that's been raised numerous times, so we're proposing a requirement of 92 decibels for motorcycles at idle. It would be measured at the point of exhaust from the motorcycle. This is based upon the Society of Automotive Engineers recommendations. It's also the same standard been used in Caledon and Oakville, who are the only two municipalities in Ontario that we're aware of that have such a restriction. It has to be done in partnership with Toronto Police Service, because we do not have the authority to pull over moving vehicles on the roadway, so it would be something that we would undertake in conjunction with them. And then finally, decibel readings at source versus point of reception. There's been a variety of discussions and points raised around that. We are proposing that we would measure noise, and the best way to measure noise and identify the impact on a resident is to measure at the point of reception. It would be measured at the point of reception would be at the exterior of the building. However, there will be instances where we would have to measure it within somebody's living space or their balcony. So for example, if you're in a condominium tower and you're complaining about noise coming from a rooftop patio, us measuring noise at the facade of your condominium building will not achieve or measure what's the impact of the actual noise where you are residing. So we would have to go and do the measurement there. That's what we do now currently for air conditioning noise. So this is extending that to amplified sound as well. We did consult with New York City, who have both types of noise measurements, and their recommendation was, again, from their own experience, that measuring at point of reception is the most effective measurement tool for enforcement purposes when we get into a courtroom. No, vibration, sorry, didn't realize I had more. Vibration. So vibration, currently the noise bylaw speaks to vibration in our current noise bylaw, but has no measures in there. So we've looked at that and we want to make clarity. Vibration from construction activity is regulated through the building bylaw, chapter 363, which Toronto Building administers. But noise and vibration from base sound, what we call DBC, that is in fact a noise type. It's just that you feel it more than you hear it. We are proposing regulations around that, which currently our bylaw does not have. So we're not losing the ability to regulate noise-borne vibrations, but we're providing that clarity that vibrations from other types of activities, such as construction activities, is not something we regulate. And the continuous concrete pouring and large crane work, again, we're proposing rules and regulations around that, not allowing a blanket exemption that currently exists. We're also proposing changes to how we do enforcement of noise. We've heard and we know that, it's one thing to have a bylaw and have rules in place, but if you don't have effective enforcement, it is of no value. So we are currently looking at how we respond to noise complaints. We're looking at developing a priority response model. So for instance, we get a lot of noise complaints that it's a one-time event, somebody does something, whether it's playing music in the middle of the night or some other event happens, but it's only happened that one time. Currently, our model is we will respond and expend resources on dealing with that issue, but when you look at it, we realize there's no value to that. but we are tying up resources that we should be putting towards more of the ongoing, continual, repetitive type of noise issues. Those we will definitely deal with. We are looking at providing, we've expanded our hours of operation for our officers for greater coverage, and we're looking at developing and enhancing the training we give to our officers, both on the operational procedures as well as more technical training, because if the bylaw as we propose is adopted by council, it will require a more objective noise measurement using noise monitoring devices. So we have to train our officers for that as well.
We're recommending an October 1st, 2019 implementation date. That gives us 6 months to do the necessary training, education to the various industries in this space. It also allows us to do some implementation planning. There's a lot of work that goes into finalizing our priority response model, updating our operating procedures, creating a noise technical manual which allows our officers to go through a thorough process, and enhancing our back-end technology systems. Again, this is work that needs to be case managed, and we need to make the system changes in order to do that. Finally, if the proposed bylaw changes are adopted, MLS will proceed to identifying and procuring sound level meters. We feel it's important that we have the right technology to do the readings, and we'll also secure a third-party firm to provide us additional technical training to support our officers in doing this enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. What I'd like to suggest, members, is that we'll ask the staff to just step down and then to allow the public to speak on this issue. It seems most people have been here all morning, so I'd like to maybe just bring them forward. The first speaker, or the applicant, is Harold Smith. Mr. Smith, you're here? Oh, great. Mr. Smith, good afternoon and welcome, sir. You will have 5 minutes to speak, and members of the committee may ask you questions or may not, okay? I'll start your time when you're ready, sir. Let me know when you're ready. Ready?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I'm Harold Smith. I'm a Lytton Park Residents Organization Director. I'm a Toronto Noise Coalition member, and I was a registered architect for over 40 years. Since 2015, we emailed, deputed, and attended noise working group sessions and public consultations to improve this bylaw. Despite some tinkering, the recommendations are still inadequate. For example, exempting types of noise covered as unreasonable and persistent shrinks the bylaw's effectiveness. The bylaw reviews words, quote, "There is growing awareness of the health impacts of environmental and ambient background noise," quote, "is weak, considering the significant research concluding noise harms health and well-being. It questions Toronto's noise reduction commitment." The review's phrase, quote, "potential negative health consequences," quote, "downplays how noise impairs mental and physical health." As a contrast, Public Health's report, "How Loud is Too Loud," is unequivocal. Health impacts associated with environmental noise are both acute and chronic in nature. Approaches to reducing noise exposure include prescribing limits and noise mitigation measures in the bylaw. And I would think that applies to all noise and not the restriction of some noise, exempting some noise from that because it's too hard to regulate or it's not done in some other municipality. Transform TO's report, number 1, clearly states the majority of other cities who address small engine equipment concerns use noise regulations, and we believe this is the most feasible option for Toronto as well. MLS's jurisdiction scan cited one city with leaf blower restriction bans, missing Vancouver's 60 decibel limit and leaf blower free zone, Beaconsfield, Quebec, and over 170 municipalities in 31 states, including Washington, D.C. These jurisdictions prioritize health over special interests by banning, restricting this equipment. D.C.'s Leaf Blower Act states, some gas-powered leaf blowers produce noise levels exceeding 100 decibels. Noise at 85 decibels can penetrate windows up to 800 feet away. Leaf blowers also emit fumes from engines and storage containers. California's EPA reports the best-selling commercial leaf blowers emit as much smog-forming pollution after just 1 hour of use as driving a 2016 Toyota Camry about 1,100 miles. Gas blowers contribute to environmental and noise pollution, which increase public health problems such as hearing loss, chronic respiratory conditions, seasonal allergies, stress hormone release, etc., and also dementia, because there's a lack of stimulation from hearing. Construction. Generous Committee of Adjustment and T-Lab concessions have increased infill construction sites and noise in many neighborhoods. Toronto must mitigate these deafening levels to protect adjacent residents. In the construction facilitation session, the few industry reps, all living beyond Toronto, wanted no noise reduction measures, while most others, all Torontonians, did. MLS recommends no construction mitigation, noise mitigation, except for exemptions. It's scandalous industry reps who don't live, pay taxes, or vote here prevailed, while TO residents will continue suffering. Ditto for leaf blowers. New York City's exemplary bylaw requires construction noise mitigation plans as conditional for all permits. Industrial strength construction noise must not plague neighbors so contractors can cut corners. Ban loud, dirty standby gas generators when hydro is available. Require noise baffles around loud operations. Mandate acoustic abatement measures for loud AC units, etc. Strong noise abatement regulations won't stall development in North America's hottest market, nor will it stop the red herring of affordable housing. Mitigation is cheap. The real cost is GTA traffic, and everybody knows that. Enforcement. Bylaws are worthless without strong enforcement. How can increased fines be collected without more staff? In facilitation sessions, residents complained about Toronto's weak enforcement system. MLS doesn't recommend improving enforcement, but other jurisdictions manage responsive systems with proper staff levels. New York City just...
Okay, wrap it up for me, sir. I've given you over 5 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Just wrap it up for me, please. Okay. Thank you very much. Let me just check to see if there's any questions of you, sir. So give me a moment. Did you have one final last sentence that you wanted to complete? Because I wanted you to finish
Yes,
that.
just one more.
I was just, asking you to wrap it up.
Here it is.
Yes.
Toronto must craft the best bylaw and enforcement possible to be a truly livable city.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Are there any questions for Mr. Smith? Visiting councillor, Councillor Wong-Tam? No? There are no questions of you, sir. Thank you very much for your presentation. Our next deputant is Ula Colgrass, York Key Neighborhood Association. Good afternoon and welcome. You've been here all morning and I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Committee? We don't press buttons anymore? Yeah.
I think it's automatic now, actually.
It's on. All right, good. So I'm speaking on behalf of York Key Neighborhood Association on the Central Waterfront. And as you know, it's a favorite recreational area for the GTA, attracting millions of visitors every year. Around the bay, we have a dozen permanent or temporary outdoor performance venues with over 100 concerts each summer. And that's a lot of amplified sound in a densely populated area. So I'm going to concentrate on that in my comments to you. First, let me say that the local residents welcome the crowds to our beautiful neighborhood, and we attend concerts ourselves. But we also expect our homes to be private and quiet. The proposed noise bylaw could put an end to the general prohibition of noise entering buildings from outside sources at any time. We could now get intrusive noise in our homes all day from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. with less noise allowed during the night when people sleep. But this is a big city with plenty of night workers and people working at home, all needing a quiet home during the day. So we request that the general prohibition stays with quiet around the clock. Sound and vibration from concerts should be measured and controlled at the concert venues. If staff is not available, it can be done cheaper and better by strategically placing noise sensors that provide digital data. You don't need people involved. MLS cannot use complaints from the public as a gauge to identify noise problem areas. On the waterfront, plenty of residents in condo buildings complained about unwanted noise in their homes, which in many cases are right across the street from an open concert venue. To process a complaint, MLS hands them a form to keep meticulous noise logs over several weeks. They must agree to appear in court with the noisemakers, whoever they are, and be liable for court costs if they lose the case. Guess how many people volunteered for that? Instead, many sold their homes, and the rest no longer complained. So this current system is not working on the waterfront. Still, there's no mention of changes or improvements in the draft noise bylaw. We request that the onus for excessive noise rests on the noise makers and not the hapless residents. Notices about loud events must be given in much wider area than 100 meters from the venue. In high-rise environments like ours, sound travels upwards into condo towers for several blocks. We propose that the local city council is given notice at least 2 weeks in advance, and that information is listed on an MLS website. Exemptions should be given one at a time, not as packages covering several months. All exemptions should be approved first by a city councilor who has the final word and not the word of the executive director. MLS claims that only their inspectors can measure noise and vibration with their sound meters, and we would like to know where to purchase such a sound meter, since we have a number of high-tech experts in YQ&A who could learn how to use it. I may not fully understand what a LEC sound measure means, but if it means the average sound measured over 10 minutes, it doesn't work for music. It works for a generator or other consistent sound, but music fluctuates from high to low dBA levels, and only the high and thumping sounds travel inside buildings. So LEC does not work for measuring music. Instead, dBZ decibel measures should be used. It may be new to some of you, but new noise meters have dBZ capacity that covers the full spectrum of sound and does not allow for statistical manipulation. After 2 years of participating in shaping a new noise bylaw, most of YQ&A's requests and concerns have been ignored. The process seemed driven by commercial interests rather than the health and well-being of people living in this great city. So more work needs to be done, and we ask for a deferral.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments, ma'am. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Okay. Our next speaker is Carolyn Johnson from York Key Neighbourhood Association. Ms. Johnson, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Former planner with the City of Toronto. It's good to see you, and in Scarborough particularly.
How are things in Scarborough? Much the same?
Fantastic.
Good.
Which is always the way. Thank you.
Yes, I miss it sometimes.
We miss you as well.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm from YQ&A as well. I want to address a different issue. First of all, I would like to thank the MLS staff for undertaking this extensive review. We appreciated the opportunity to provide input. But if the goal was just to simplify the chapter, then that goal has been achieved. If the goal was to protect the inhabitants of Toronto from excessive noise, then I have my doubts. Other deputants have been focusing on other issues, sound levels and noise sources. But I'm especially concerned about the exemption process, which has by far the largest section in this draft bylaw. Let's compare the proposals with the process under other statutes. The Planning Act, with which I'm very familiar, and even the sign bylaw requires public notice and a consultation process long before any approval is given for an application to amend the relevant regulation. The draft before us suggests that the ward councillor only needs 14 days to consider an exemption application, and that the public only needs and deserves a 7-day warning that approval has already been given for an event. What is the public supposed to do with this information? The only recourse this late in the day is to purchase earplugs or leave town. I'm not comfortable either with the default being staff approval if nothing is heard from the councillor after 2 weeks. The noise bylaw exists to control unreasonable sound levels. Exemptions should be rare and onerous to obtain, and the default should be refusal unless the councillor and his constituents are happy with the event and the mitigation proposed. This was one of the options shown to the public during the most recent round of consultations, and I'm wondering what happened to that. On page 25 of the staff report, it is suggested that the councillor may request conditions. I think this provision should also be reflected in the actual bylaw. I do not agree with the approval of one permit for multiple events during 3 months. I assume this would apply to something like a concert series, but the type of music and the sound equipment used could be widely different between events, and one size may not fit all. For construction, it may be appropriate if the activities are more predictable, such as concrete pouring or pile driving. Where a city agency is the applicant, it certainly makes sense to waive the fee, but I think the rest of the usual conditions should apply, including the need for a contact person to be on site during the event. On pages 28 to 29, the staff report discusses this issue, mentioning that economic development applies for noise exemption permits for certain festivals. It also states that written notice to affected residents is encouraged. The NBA All-Star Weekend in 2016 was actually one of the most egregious noise sources on the waterfront, with pounding music and a yelling DJ housed in a tent which provided zero noise mitigation and lasted for 3 nights. There was no information given to nearby residents about this party. A related matter is damage to the park, which to this day has not been repaired. In closing, I would say that this review has come a long way, but we're not there yet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. Are there any questions?
I'm asking the committee to refer it back to staff for further discussion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Johnson? Okay, seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We have our next speaker is Nadia Tarova, the Residential Construction Council of Ontario.
Good afternoon. That was a great job on my last name, too.
Oh, is that? Okay, great. Happy to. So I see there are others with you as well.
Yes, so
Okay,
I'm just going to get into that beforehand. So we're going
Right,
to
and so we have Jason.
be, no, it's going to be Carmina to pay
Okay, so
from,
so Carmina, and is Carmina on the list elsewhere? I'm just looking at the names that I have
Yeah.
here. So, okay, so let's just make sure I start this over again.
yeah.
So I have your name in, and I also had Jason from La Una 183.
Yes,
So
so-
that's 2 people.
Yes.
So I'm looking at the podium, and I see 5. And are all 5 speaking?
so we've brought some member executives who could answer any technical questions that the committee
Okay,
may
fair enough. No, that's fine. What I'd like to do is just to make sure my list is
Sure,
corresponding with respect to the numbers. So you have a supporting cast.
Yes, exactly.
Fantastic. So
Exactly.
you saw the film piece today, so. you
Yes,
brought
we
your
were
supporting
inspired by that, yes.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so there will be 2 specific speakers then, or just
Yes,
one?
it will be myself and Carmina.
Fair enough, and then you have the supporting cast.
Yes,
So you'll have 10 minutes to speak. I just
Yes,
wanted to confirm
exactly.
that. Okay, thank you very much. You may begin.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, councillors, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Nadia Tudorova, and I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Residential Construction Council of Ontario, or RESCON. We represent more than 200 high-rise, low-rise, and mid-rise builders in Ontario, and today I'm joined by my colleague, Carmina Toupé from BUILD.
And like Nadia said, my name is Carmina. I'm a planner with the Policy and Government Relations team at BUILD, the Building Industry and Land Development Association. We represent over 4,500 developers, builders, and renovators across the GTA, and I'm here on behalf of our Toronto chapter members.
Thank you, Carmina. So we're here today to...
Do you mind introducing the other members of your cast?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'll give you a little bit of time to be able to.
Yeah, they can introduce themselves.
Sure.
Hi, Joe Francavilla from Mancus Developments in the high-rise sector.
Okay,
I'm Bruno Giancola. I'm with Tridel Corporation.
okay, thank you.
Steve Daniels from Tridel.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also sit on the ResCon board, just to.
Okay, fantastic. I'll give you an extra 30 seconds on your.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're here today to express our views on the proposed changes to Chapter 591 noise bylaw as they pertain to the high-rise building construction industry. We're also representing the position of other industry partners, including LiUNA Local 183, who is the largest construction local union in North America, representing more than 58,000 construction workers in the GTHA. LiUNA has been a very strong industry partner on this topic, and I just want to point out that this is not a labor management divisive issue, so there's a lot of agreement on this. We're also representing the point of the Ontario Formwork Association, and as that has already been stated, we have some executives from high-rise development here today to highlight the importance of this issue to our industry. So the bylaw, as has been noted earlier, allows construction work between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. on weekdays and 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Saturdays. Under the current bylaw, the time constraints do not apply to the continuous pouring of concrete, large crane work, and necessary municipal work that can extend beyond regular construction hours. The proposed amendment that is before you today maintains the time constraint but removes the exemption for continuous concrete pouring and large crane work. Any construction work that may need to be completed outside of the permitted hours, including continuous concrete pouring and large crane work, would require a noise exemption permit, including a new measure such as a qualified rationale for granting the exemption prepared by a professional engineer. These proposed amendments to the noise bylaw will have significant negative impact on construction project timelines, labor productivity, and project cost in the City of Toronto, thus making housing even more out of reach for most Torontonians. We want to make it clear that these proposed changes will not only slow down construction of high-rise condominiums in Toronto, but they will also hurt the efficient delivery of all other housing types, including purpose-built rental and affordable housing. Carmina?
Without the exemption for continuous concrete pouring and finishing, this work will be restricted to take place within permitted work hours, significantly delaying the overall completion schedule of building projects. This will prolong the associated noise and congestion of surrounding projects instead of allowing the builders to finish the project earlier. The inherent properties of concrete require it to be poured and begin curing before the surface finishes can take place. Also, concrete needs time to set, which is highly dependent on weather conditions. Therefore, the rigid restrictions are incompatible with the multi-stage and particular finishing of concrete. The concrete floor slab pour is typically completed well within the permitted hours of construction. However, the current as-of-right exemption for continuous concrete pouring enables concrete finishing to take place outside of the set hours once the concrete has begun to set and is able to be finished. Therefore, it is only the concrete surface finishing on each floor level that necessitates this exemption. As such, the title of the exemption, continuous concrete pouring, is a misnomer, as concrete finishing is typically what takes place after hours and is completed by a small 2 or 3 person crew. And that brings us to the public opinion research findings that was cited by the Municipal Licensing and Standards Report. It was found that the residents were generally more understanding of construction activities that cannot stop once they have started, for example, the concrete pouring. Industry stakeholders were surprised to learn about the continuous concrete exemption recommendation, as it was not identified as a typical item of concern from the public. During the community meetings they were conducted as part of the review, city staff reported that 2/3 of residents do not have noise concerns and believe that noise levels in Toronto are reasonable and reflect life in the big city, and only 8% identified construction noise as a specific concern. These statistics come from the findings of the public opinion research.
Great, thank you, Carmina. So I just want to consider this example for the committee. A typical 2-year condominium timeline to build the concrete superstructure could be extended to 3 years or more if the continuous concrete pouring exemption is removed and recurrent exemption permits are not expeditiously granted. This would result in continuing and extended construction duration and associated noise. It would cause existing affordability to worsen, and it will also cause housing supply to get smaller. Simply put, the construction bylaw amendments need more time and thought. The proposed changes to the noise bylaw are slated to come into effect on October 1st of this year. This will impact the dozens of high-rise projects that are either under construction or will begin construction soon. The proposed changes to the noise bylaw will cripple the industry's ability to deliver these buildings, as extended project durations will not have been forecasted in the construction schedule. This will affect the lives of many home buyers, as the anticipated completion and occupancy timelines for these buildings will be at risk of significant delays. Further, we believe that the public will be confused by the current proposed changes, as based on the report, it is clear that quote-unquote necessary municipal work will continue to be exempt from the noise bylaw. The scope of necessary municipal work has also been expanded to include any government work, which includes construction, rehabilitation, or maintenance work conducted by the City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, and the Government of Canada, and any of its agents. Based on this proposal, it is evident that the city does not intend to hold itself to the same accountability of addressing public noise concerns that the private sector is expected to perform to. If the amendments to the bylaw are accepted, this would create a diametrically opposed two-tiered system. It would be a system where the private sector would be stifled by the noise bylaw, but government work can operate uninhibited. Ultimately, this would not address the few noise concerns expressed by the public. In fact, 311 data does not consider complaints related to public versus private projects or permitted hours versus non-permitted projects of construction. It's just one big data dump. We'd also like to address the process of obtaining exemption permits that is proposed in front of you. It is impractical, as the involved parties are typically at odds. Development decisions have become increasingly politicized. If councillors grant exemption permits, there is a perception that they are prioritizing the needs of a developer over the public. And if a councillor denies exemptions, they're sticking up for their local constituents. We also want to avoid situations where councillors who oppose a new development during the approvals process now have the authority to make further negative impact. Granting exemption permits has the potential to become highly contentious, which is why MLS should act as the impartial authority to oversee applications, not councillors. In addition, the fact that the exemption permits are only proposed to cover a 3-month period is impractical, as project timelines are measured in years, necessitating anywhere from 8 to 12 permits on a typical project, adding more redundant work for councillors and MLS who already face resource challenges. The exemption permits represent a double-edged sword. If it is the intent of councillors and MLS to approve exemption permits relating to continuous concrete pouring on a consistent and regular basis, then that negates the purpose of removing the exemption in the first place. However, if councillors are moved to deny exemption permits in this additional level of bureaucracy, that would further reduce streamlining efforts undertaken when this as-of-right exemption was first approved in 2007 to facilitate the high rise of residential condominiums in the city. Sorry. Oh, apologize for that. In summary, any restrictions or added process delays to the current bylaw exemptions would cripple the productivity of high-rise building construction, impacting project duration and cost. We would all like to avoid further unintended consequences and prevent policy remorse that will directly hinder housing supply and affordability, contrary to city objectives. Understanding that this is a critical issue that has far-reaching impacts for both public and industry, we would be happy to have the current exemption remain in place for the time being, while an industry working group is convened to better examine in detail the qualitative and quantitative impacts surrounding the noise bylaw as they pertain to construction. We don't want to hold back the whole noise bylaw and prevent the good work that's been done, but we'd like further consideration on the construction issue. Industry has also proposed to develop a noise mitigation plan for high-rise projects to improve communication and understanding from affected residents. Rather than having staff review every exemption permit and come up with so-called additional requirements, we would propose to keep the current as-of-right exemption for concrete pouring, but he'll still have staff ask for noise mitigation plan that outlines how a project mitigates the disturbances to residents. Industry would be happy to work with staff on the development of the guidance criteria for this plan, and our member Tridel already does this work on most of its projects, and they can talk more about that if there's questions. We thank you for the attention today, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for the deputants? Councillor Montan?
Yes, since you've mentioned that Tridel already has a noise mitigation strategy at their construction sites, would you like to tell us about that? Sure.
Thanks. Again, my name is Steve Daniels. I'm with Tridel. So just to put it into context, in the last, since 9 years, we've built over 12,000 units just at Tridel, and then our Delterra branch, we've got another 6,000 units. So we're well into this and understand what needs to be done. And we've been working with staff, Carlton and Mark, particularly when Mark was over in Etobicoke, and we know what it takes to get things done. When issues are coming up, it's how you respond to them and deal with them right away. We like to get into the front of the councillor's office, deal with the condo corporation if it is that, or the residents, and figure out what the issue is, where the source of the noise is coming from, to address that. We've had personal experience on this, and that can be a number of things. That's providing schedules on what we're doing, having regular ongoing communication with the residents in the area, notify the residents when we're going to have a constant pour so that they're aware that there is going to be a disruption with trucks in the area, where those trucks are coming from. So it's really a communication plan at the end of the day that works with our construction management plan with staff and dealing with this. And I can tell you the amount of complaints that we've had are pretty much next to none. We've been able to deal with issues that are one-offs that I would say that come up, but we've got 2 revitalization projects where people are working, they're living right next to these sites. And again, issues like the noise that's emanating from the crane that would have a beeping sound that is a required sound, but we're able to try and deal with that. Recently, we just had a dewatering issue up on DuPont, where the residents were complaining that the noise was emanating from that. Simple solution. We took the generator and put it down into the hole. You know, like it's really a communication. And again, we're here to support the agents or our group to basically say we're doing it. We're working with city staff. We don't think that this exemption needs to be removed, because if we can do it, other developers can do it too.
Are you suggesting that the industry be given an opportunity to develop a noise mitigation strategy on large construction sites that MLS staff will then review? Is that the proposal before us?
I think from Tridel's perspective, we can come to the table working with city staff. They already know what we're doing and build upon that. Best practices, I would call it.
So considering the consultation for the noise bylaw review has now been at the very minimum 3 to almost 4 years in the making, what prevented you from putting this on the table sooner?
Oh, we have. This has been our position from the beginning. We have multiple submissions as part of this process. We have been engaged in the process from the very beginning, so we've always been part of that. So I can't really answer why those recommendations have not been accepted.
Okay. Is it a matter of volunteering so that the industry then volunteers to do it, or is it a mandatory requirement by way of the exemptions for the continuous pour, or just the approval of the site? Was it were you proposing something that the mandatory the industry put forth?
No, I think what we're proposing is that the issue of concrete pouring on a continuous basis, whenever it's required,
I understand that.
It's not predictable.
Thank you. I understand that part. What I'm speaking to is a noise mitigation strategy. I was asking if this was tabled to MLS staff, were you offering that? Were you suggesting that this be voluntary for the sector, or is this a mandatory requirement that the sector would take on, agree to, that there would be a noise mitigation strategy with the development?
Last question.
I think how I would respond to that is what we're doing right now is voluntary. We're dealing with vibration. We're monitoring that. We're not required to, but we're doing that. We're dealing with the noise that's coming from that. We have monitors. We have consultants that we use that let us know what the decimal points are. So we're doing that as a voluntary basis. I would suggest that we continue that, and we have a best practices approach that we can adopt across the table.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Because I was part of the working group.
Jason Audi.
Jason Audi was leaving Local 183, I apologize.
Hey, Jason.
Our best practice approach was meant to be something that was agreed upon from industry, both labor and management, as well as city staff, and that best practice approach would be adopted by policy. But our approach was to maintain the exemption and have this best practice approach adopted as policy, enforced, for lack of a better word, by MLS, but be required by all participants.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, just before I go on to visiting Councillor Layton, it has just been brought to my attention by Councillor Lai that she would like to make a comment and I think this is extremely important. So, Councillor, I'll let you comment on your matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just realized that this deputation, Tridel, is part of the speaker, and I do still have business relationship with Tridel based on my realtor capacity. So I think, therefore, I have to declare a conflict, and I must leave the room now.
She will.
Okay.
She's got the forms. Thank you very much, Councillor. So you will leave the meeting room, and the clerk has worked with you regarding the appropriate course of action that you have to take. And thank you for realizing that. Okay, so we will just give the councillor an opportunity to leave the room. Great. Councillor Layton, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just a couple of quick questions. And I'll thank Mr. Daniels, because I'm the local councillor where the issue was along Dupont, or now the local councillor where the issue was around, along Dupont. And I thank you for resolving that issue quickly. I think that was a fair representation of the course of events and reflected a good neighbor policy. My question around these constant pours. The reports that we get, and I'm not saying it's any of your organizations, because I'm looking for a solution for this, is that the constant pour exemption is being used in bad faith by some, in that the constant pour isn't starting at the beginning of the workday. It's starting towards the end of the workday, and then being done in the hours that you wouldn't normally be allowed to work in. So I again, not trying to accuse any of you of that, because I know that it's not all developers, because I haven't had this problem with every developer. But we are having some of this problem now, none of which your sites are close to. So that's probably bodes well. How would you propose that we strengthen, if we were to reintroduce, would there be a way to strengthen it, the bylaw, so that, or the exemption, so that we could ensure that indeed these constant pours were starting at the beginning of the workday rather than at the end?
I think before we answer that, I think it's important to understand, so everyone understand what a constant pour is. So if we could maybe just explain what a constant pour is as a starting point.
Let us take that, yeah. So maybe I can, I'm Joe Francavilla from Mancus Developments. I'm not a Tridel guy. So,
doesn't have to exempt himself.
Yeah, the regular cycle, the regular cycle of work is, we can't start before 7. We'd love to start before 7, but we can't. So at 7 o'clock in the morning, usually the carpenters, the steel, all the men start to form the floor that's going to take the concrete. So that's steel, electricians, plumbers are all working all day long to get this ready so they can start pouring concrete. Now, as these projects are getting taller, more complicated, traffic to get materials to the site take longer. We used to be able to pour at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning and finish by 4 or 5. Now we're pushed to 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon before we start pouring concrete. Once we start, we can't stop. So that 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock start might take to 5, 6, 7 o'clock, and then the cement finishers go on to finish it. We have to finish that process because the next day at 7 o'clock in the morning, all those men and women come back to work and they start working on that floor that was just poured the night before. If we're not able to finish that pour and we have to stop at 7 o'clock, everyone that comes the next morning has nowhere to go. They stay home. These are hourly union workers. They get paid by the hour. They don't show up to work. They don't get paid. So every second day, they would have a day off. Soon you're going to lose all your skilled labor. They're going to pick another industry. So we have to, once we start, we have to complete the pour. And I think the pouring of concrete doesn't seem to be an issue from a sound or noise perspective. It's the machines that are on top of the concrete that make the noise, which we've tried to work with the community. In Councillor Wong Tam's district, we have a project that we're currently working on where every Friday we email the officers, the bylaw officers, of what we're doing, when we're pouring concrete, when the trucks are coming, so that it's clear. We've met with the community once a month, sometimes more. So we found in the past, as Steve said, if we inform the community what we're doing, when we're going to make noise, if we are going to make noise, and how we can mitigate it, that seems to be the best policy rather than just stopping this, continuous pour completely.
Just to add to that, so sort of two definitions of a continuous pour. If we're doing a large, massive pour, I know Joe just did one down on the waterfront where the trucks ran for 20 hours. That's a lot easier to schedule and to notify the community this is going to happen this Thursday, it's going to go all night, or Friday night. That's not the issue. The issue is where we're running into trouble getting the concrete to the tower at 10, 11 o'clock. So if they start running behind an hour or two and they have to pour past, let's say, 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock, then the cement finishers end up going further. There's not too many times in a pouring day that we get pouring past 7 o'clock of the concrete pour. It's the finishing people that come on with the sort of light grinders that cure the concrete at the end of the day. And we've been experiencing so much problem, especially with traffic congestion lately and volume of work, where the actual pours and stuff will end up slowing themselves down and we end up shooting an hour or two later. The larger, massive pours where we know that's easy to communicate to the neighborhood. What we try to do, I try it out with our websites when we go into a neighborhood, we open up a community website, and if we find ourselves getting later in the day, we try to communicate that to the neighborhood and to the councilor's office as soon as we can so that people can type in on it.
I think that's, Michael, that's your last question, Councillor. I'll come back. Just give me a second. So,
it was more of an editorial comment.
Okay, well, I'll let you make it. All right, good, okay. Questions? Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Our next speaker is Eldon Mathers. Mr. Mathers? Good afternoon. Hello. How are you? Let me know when you're ready, sir. You'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and committee members, for providing this opportunity to address the committee. I make these comments on my own behalf. I understand this review's goal is to serve residents while enabling economic and social vibrancy, allowing defined noise levels, while imposing conditions such as monitoring by city staff. I am a Ward 25 resident. From 2013 through 2018, my household has endured hundreds of hours of extremely loud amplified sound music from a neighbor's vehicle directed directly into the front of our house for his stated purpose of intentional harassment. As a result, I have become acquainted with the existing noise bylaw, its enforcement, and I am well placed to comment on the nuisance of amplified noise. The concern that I bring to the committee is regarding the proposed bylaws, Article 2, Prohibitions, 591-2.1, amplified sound. This proposal indicates that the sole evidence permitted is that measured with an improved sound meter. For city-sanctioned activities working to mitigate noise, this is a reasonable expectation. However, in the case of personal audio devices, this is an unreasonable requirement, effectively preventing enforcement, defeating the intent of the bylaw. Individual offenders would simply turn down the volume during measurement and return it to full volume upon completion of the measurement. This would serve to perpetuate the commonly held fallacy that creating unlimited amplified noise is a legal right in Toronto from 8 a.m. until 11 p.m. I am therefore requesting that the committee move to amend Article 2, 591-2.1, adding a statement that evidence supporting complaints about personal audio devices, except witnesses' subjective accounts, descriptions, audio and video recordings as fit evidence for enforcement, as in any other offense investigation. I further submit that this example of a description be included in the amendment. Amplified sound audible at a distance of 8 meters. This is similar to the local laws of the City of New York. This would provide for witnesses' subjective statements or, alternatively, measurements with calibrated instrumentation by qualified people to be used for enforcement, resolving staff's reported enforcement difficulties. I close by stating the obvious, that a noise bylaw's fundamental consideration is to protect the health and quality of life for those within the city. An enforceable bylaw is necessary to ensure compliance and protect the quality of life in Toronto. Please consider moving to enact my proposed amendment. I thank the committee for undertaking this important review of Chapter 591 and welcome any questions you have.
Thank you very much, sir. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, sir. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Tony Di Giovanni. Good afternoon, sir. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Deputy Mayor Thompson and councillors. My name is Tony Di Giovanni. I'm the Executive Director of Landscape Ontario Horticultural Trades Association. We represent 2,800 companies focused on designing, installing, and maintaining plants, trees, gardens, and green spaces. We also represent garden centers and nurseries. We are co-founder of Canada Blooms and a partner in Open Streets Toronto. We are the original green industry. From an economic impact perspective, our sector is worth $7 billion. We employ 70,000 people. Our members are focused on installing and maintaining green spaces that make the city livable. Unfortunately, we need power tools to do the job. There's no other way, especially because our biggest issue by far is finding employees. Power tools are essential. However, we support the need for a quieter city. After all, we are responsible for the green spaces that offer refuge, solace, recreation, and beauty, while at the same time clean the air we breathe, cool the city, and trap carbon dioxide. Therefore, we agree with the time limits that the noise bylaw puts forth and look forward to communicating the bylaw to our members. In addition, we actively educate our members on the proper and courteous use of power equipment, and we will continue to promote the use of battery-powered equipment. We will also make an offer. If you receive complaints about our members, we would be pleased to intervene to see if we can help through communication and education. We have online training resources for the membership. We predict that within 10 years, there will be a revolution in the power equipment field. It is already starting. Equipment today is much quieter and less polluting than it was 10 years ago. This trend will continue. Battery power robotic equipment is also becoming mainstream. We look to a future where noise from landscape equipment will no longer be an issue. We thank the city for a bylaw that is reasonable and balanced. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Mr. Giovanni? Okay, there are no questions of you, sir. Thank you. Our next speaker is Sylvia Crowhurst.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. It's my first time doing this.
Okay, well, I'll let you
Bear with me.
just take your time. Let me know when you're all
Some
set up
people
and
have
ready to
spoken
go.
my subject. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Sylvia Crowhurst. I am a resident of Ward 19. I attended the public consultations at Scadding Court Community Centre on January 30th this year. Unfortunately, even though noise exemptions was on the January 30th agenda, it was not discussed with the public who attended due to time constraints, and I made the organizers aware of that fact. Noise exemptions for events using amplified sound is my primary concern. My neighbors and I have had personal experience being disturbed by an annual noise exemption permit for me over the last 15 years in my house on a residential street with 85 decibels of sound 2 days in a row. As a result of my experience in looking at the MLS submission, I see little recommended change around noise exemption permits. It appears to be status quo. To summarize briefly what's involved in getting that noise exemption permit, anyone can apply for it. Now you have this 3-month period of your events. There's no restriction on location, no mechanism to consult residents. You fill out your application, contact person, dates, times, you pay your $100, and it goes to MLS. The councillor, I understand, still has the ultimate approval. On points 45 to 48, we see that there's more power given to the executive director. The language shows, and I will enforce this, the executive director may request additional information, including, for example, noise mitigation plan. They may conditionally approve a permit or revoke one for non-compliance. They may post a notice 7 days in advance of the event. To go with that, the 7 days, if the 7 days notice is given and posted, I state to you as councillors, that would be the only time a resident of Toronto is aware of a noise exemption application in their neighborhood. It remains 85 decibels of amplified sound measured at a 20 meter from source remains. The applicant still has an appeal process through community councils if their permit is not approved. Residents in the vicinity will be informed of that process. I put it to you again, being not aware that the permit existed in the first place, they're appealing, and then we would be informed that they were appealing the process. So that would be the first we might hear of that noise exemption. Where does that leave residents? Much is left to the discretion of the executive director. We do not know what their criteria will be in making their decision. As it stands, there's no change in the final decision being made by the councillor. So how do the two work together? Can one influence the other? Can a councillor influence the executive director representing their particular constituents? And I could give examples, but I'm not going to. MLS, in their submission, has not considered permits allowed on residential streets, and I brought that to their attention. That use of 85 decibels of sound for music is unreasonable in areas surrounded by buildings that obviously will be amplified by that sound. I would submit that neither MLS nor the city has examined the record of exemptions for music and festivals over any period of time. If they did this, they could examine how many were on residential streets or whether there was an area of the city that's disproportionately affected. If that was done, if that review was done, this would be an effective tool for the executive director when noise exemption applications are brought to their attention. I've got a couple of minutes. My final observation, and I'm not an expert on surveys, but when I looked at the Ipso-Reid survey highlight that MLS puts out in their report, they emphasize the 64% of residents believe that noise levels in Toronto are reasonable, and while 36% of residents believe that more needs to be done to restrict noise because of potential negative health consequences. I put it to you, when you look at that report, the question to people being surveyed was to rate reducing traffic and congestion, improving public safety, reducing overcrowding on public transit, improving housing, improving environment, for example. And noise was only one of those. So you had to rate it. If we asked you right now to rate those right now, you likely would probably not put noise as your top.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our deputy? There are no questions of you, ma'am. Thank you. Kathy McDonald? Thank you. I'll let you get all settled in, Ms. McDonald, and you'll have 5 minutes to speak. Let me know when you're ready, and I'll start your time.
So my name is Kathy McDonald, and I'm here today representing the Federation of North Toronto Residents Association. I'm co-chair, and we've been part of the Toronto Noise Coalition basically since its beginning. I'm pleased this item is at your committee today. The noise bylaw is certainly an economic and community development issue. We need a livable city, and a good noise bylaw will help residents and businesses work well together. That's what we've been promoting. It's certainly a big and complicated subject. This is all the paper that was provided with this item today. And a week is certainly not long enough to go through it all and provide comprehensive report, and it would take longer than 5 minutes anyway. There's a lot of new things in it, and we would really appreciate more time with staff to understand some of the complexities and reasons for the proposals. But the bylaw seems to focus on creating a simple, easy-to-enforce set of regulations, which is certainly a good idea, but the city is really diverse, and a simple bylaw may not be the best answer. We have different areas that have different issues. The survey that was undertaken said, I think, that 86% of residents didn't think noise was a problem, but residents who have noise issues nearby think it's 100% a problem. And it's up to the city to help address those issues. For the Fontra area, I've just listed a few, need to make sure that there is a strong general provision and that the components of protecting people from excessive noise and vibration are not lost in definitions. I'm not really sure how that's working. Protection from excessive amplified sound is also an important issue for the Fontra residents, people who are living close by and above cafes, bars, or close to outdoor patios. It can be a big problem. I mean, compared to, say, such a facility that is in an industrial area where there's nobody around. I mean, thousands of people can get affected by the excessive noise from amplified sound. So what we think that the bylaw needs to add provision to measure noise at source, and it's very easy to do for amplified noise. The manager of the Phoenix Club on Sherbourne gave a good example of how they do it and make sure that they don't exceed the noise levels. I mean, this could maybe not have to apply all over the city, but certainly in areas where there are a lot of these noise amplified sound activities, and it's much better than having lots of residents have to call 311 and complain, and have a bylaw enforcement officer come to their home and measure the sound, which is like totally unfeasible. And so for subjects like this, I think there needs to be some further consideration. I was interested in the ResCon's deputation on construction noise, and certainly agree that provisions about making construction noise quieter is really important, and that the neighbors need to be notified when noisy activities are taking place. I guess our preference would be kind of noise mitigation plan for most construction projects. Small projects and big projects may be different legal frameworks for them to really encourage quieter use of construction equipment. It's certainly getting quieter.
Wrap up, please, ma'am. You're at 5 minutes.
Backup beepers are a problem. So we need to use better technology, like the representative of the landscape organization about quieter leaf blowers. They're coming. My suggestion is put a provision in the bylaw that say in like 3 or 5 years' time, the in certain areas like
Thank you.
mine.
Thank
where
you very
it's
much.
really
It's 5:30.
noisy.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Should be banned.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any questions for Ms. McDonald? Okay, seeing none.
Add more.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McDonald. Okay, Tamara Fernandez. Ms. Fernandez, you were here earlier this morning. Thank you very much. You're back again. Thank you. Thank you for spending your day with us. You may begin.
Okay, I'm here because something happened starting in September 2018 that has shaken my faith in human decency and my belief in public servants actually having any interest in serving the public or even caring about people. It's a sad reality to be faced with. Although this is an oversimplification, let me summarize by saying the TTC caused constant, loud, high-frequency screeching noise that would go on every couple of minutes, day and night, from just before 6 a.m. until sometime between 2:30 and 3 a.m. the next day, 7 days a week. It would continue for 1 to 2 weeks at a time, then stop for 3 to 4 weeks, and then start all over again. And I don't know if it's ended. And worse, neither the TTC or 311 would do anything to prevent this noise from reoccurring or to mitigate it when it occurred, until this last time when there was some mitigation. This happened after media coverage that included a statement from a surgeon at Sunnybrook with expertise in noise-induced hearing loss that this noise definitely created a risk of noise-induced hearing loss for those exposed on a continuing basis, as I and other residents were. And many of us complained to city councillors, Toronto Public Health, and the Ombuds Office about the situation. I believe it was this combination of factors that finally got the TTC to mitigate the noise. This excessive noise violated the current noise bylaw. 311 said it was up to the TTC to do something, and staff from Municipal Licensing and Standards said that they don't enforce the bylaw on themselves. So even though this type of excessive noise can cause all kinds of harm to health, such as hearing loss, cardiovascular effects, loss of sleep, stress, depression, and other mental health impacts, and it's even worse for children in whom it can also affect cognitive development. And by the way, there are many children in my building, including a baby who lives in the unit above mine. And even though I provided all of this information about this to the TTC, they in the city let this go on and on. In the proposed changes to the bylaw, Municipal Licensing and Standards has exempted all government work. They added a definition of government work to include construction, rehabilitation, or maintenance work conducted by the city, etc. Then, under the new section on safety and government work, despite any other provision of this chapter, it shall be lawful to emit or cause or permit the emission of sound from A, bells or sirens required for the purposes of public safety, that's understandable, measures undertaken for the immediate health, safety, or welfare of persons under emergency circumstances, that's understandable, and C, government work. It makes excessive and harmful noise by city government lawful in the city, even when there is no emergency or public health or safety situation that needs to be addressed immediately. And in fact, I looked at many noise bylaws for comparable cities and couldn't find one that provides this type of blanket exemption. Most provide exemptions for emergencies. The only city bylaw that was close to this language was Calgary's, but the chief bylaw enforcement officer has discretion to apply the bylaw to city work other than related to emergencies. I'm not saying that we should take Calgary's approach. I prefer Ottawa as an example. Their exemption is that the provisions of this bylaw shall not apply to the city or any local boards, et cetera, when the emission of sound is in connection with work undertaken for the immediate health, safety, or welfare of the inhabitants of the city. And in Ottawa, city construction exemptions require application to the manager of bylaw and regulatory services, have decibel limits, requires notifying the public and councillors for affected wards, and allows for objections to be raised and for the exemption to be terminated based on complaints. The other problem with this draft bylaw is that it doesn't know what its purpose is. And this is seen clearly in the different standards for defining what a violation of the bylaw would be. There's this new definition for unreasonable noise, which uses a reasonable person standard, good luck enforcing that. Then under amplified sound, there are decibel limits set, but no indication about why these limits are set. And the section on stationary sources and air conditioners has a maximum of 50 decibels, or the applicable sound level limit prescribed in provincial noise pollution control guidelines. So provincial noise pollution control guidelines set the standard there. Then the standard changes again related to construction. At night, you can't have any clearly audible sound from the point of reception, and no sound at all from loading or unloading is permitted at night. Motor vehicles have different standards again. The language is unnecessary sound, which isn't even defined. And I'm not saying there aren't some good changes in this draft bylaw, but the two key issues I have are that it doesn't protect public health from excessive noise and doesn't include comprehensive evidence-based standards related to public health. It doesn't even say that its purpose is to preserve and protect public health and safety and welfare, and the other issue is the exemption of all government work, which puts the city above the law that it's enforcing on everyone else and puts me and others at risk.
I'm going to ask you to just over 5 minutes.
To have that
Thank you.
sweeping exemption.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputy? Councillor Wong Tam.
Is your deputation part of the written submissions as well?
Sorry?
Is your deputation, the oral deputation you just provided, is it also part of our written submissions?
Did you send it in?
Do we have a copy of it?
You can have this copy.
Okay, I would like to have it.
Okay.
Or at least make a photocopy of it. There was a lot of content I didn't catch it all.
I know, I was timing myself to make sure I was...
You did very well, but I just want to, have a deeper dive into it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next speaker is Benjamin Stein. Benjamin, you'll have 5 minutes, and there's a clock to my right, your left, when you're ready.
Okay, my thanks to the committee. My name is Benjamin Stein. I live on Torbic Road in East Toronto. In May 2018, St. Patrick's Secondary School on 49 Felstead Avenue unveiled a new outdoor soccer field. It was constructed in a deal between the Toronto Catholic District School Board and Razor Management. After school hours, the field was rented to adult amateur soccer leagues. A 15-foot alley, roughly 3 sidewalk squares in length, separates the field from residential backyards. Last year, 4 separate games were regularly played across the width of the field at the same time. Residents were subjected to incessant whistleblowing, screaming and yelling, profanity, and the kicking of balls with maximum force into the chain-link fence just north of our homes. Late-night play was made possible by stadium lighting that also shone into our back windows. Trespassing, property damage, verbal abuse, and public drinking also occurred. But by far the most distressing and debilitating experience for our neighborhood was the noise pollution. This took place as often as 7 days a week until as late as 11 p.m. and on weekend mornings from May to October of last year, 6 months without cease. We did not get used to it, we dreaded it. We closed our windows on summer nights and stayed away from our back porches. We moved our bedrooms. My neighbors have children who are diagnosed as special needs. Their symptoms have been made worse by lack of sleep. The senior citizens in the Unity Road apartments for the elderly to the west of the field have spoken publicly about their feelings of helplessness as they endure the noise of the games. As the warmer weather approaches, we look forward to it not with anticipation, but with anger and despair. The thought of enduring another 6 months of being victimized by Razor Management and the TCDSB. The players were out again last night. These corporations would like you to believe that their chief goal is promoting community sports. But the issue here is not that of competing community needs. The issue is the exploitation for corporate profit of public land that lies close to residential housing. This issue affects all Toronto citizens and should be part of the noise bylaw review discussions currently taking place. I would like to speak in support of proposed amendments 14, 15, 16, 17, 22, 49, and notably 49A. I am concerned about Section 50. I do not know if these corporations secured an exemption for their development. If they did, it means we may be subjected to multiple years like the previous one, because the bylaw will not apply to exemptions granted prior to October 2018. I have 2 final points. First, as pertains to sections 24 to 27, I ask that the committee consider that referees' whistles are amplified instruments, even if the amplification is not electronic. As the city increases in population, whistleblowing for outdoor sports activities near residential housing will be an increasing point of contention. Second, I ask that clear guidelines be enacted to clarify the parameters for commercial exploitation of public school sports facilities near residential housing throughout the city. What the TCDSB and Razor Management has done may or may not be legal. The TCDSB is currently before the courts for noise infractions on this property, but it is certainly not ethical, civic, or respectful of the surrounding community. Emails submitted to the committee by my neighbors demonstrate that my concerns are shared. On behalf of myself, my family, and my neighbors, I ask that the bylaws be enforced, modified, or created to curtail excessive commercial exploitation of public school property, and to put place mechanisms that will allow immediate action when complaints are made, including fines sufficient to compel corporations to modify their behavior. I ask that we not be forced to endure another year like the one that has just passed, and that our experience not be inflicted on other Toronto communities. Thank the committee for its time and consideration, and submit my statement for further reference.
Thank you, Benjamin. Are there any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay.
Our next speaker is Charles Brave. I apologize if I mispronounce your name, from Friends of Danforth East. Thank you, Charles. You'll have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am representing today the Friends of Danforth East, and I've also, this position has been endorsed by the Danforth Village Community Association. This morning I spoke to the president of our local business improvement area out on East Danforth, and he supports this position, but because this notice only came out a week ago and they have not had time to go through it, they have not been able to develop it thoroughly. I have made a submission which is in the papers here, but I just wanted to, which I hope you'll read. But I want to address just one issue, the issue of motorcycle noise, which is a really raucous part of fair weather life in Toronto. We think it's great news that you're trying to regulate motorcycle noise. We praise you for it. We've been waiting a long time for this. We should note that all these type of loud motorcycle exhausts are illegal. Motorcycles are sold with legal complying exhausts, complying with the Department of Transport in Ottawa. And many bike owners, irresponsible, antisocial bike owners, the first thing they do is they pull the baffles out of the tailpipe and they're blowing a lot of sound, way more than legal. So they're not compliant anymore. We need solutions that will work for Toronto. I noted that in the preamble, the city staff said that they had looked at Oakville and Caledon had adopted the standard of 92 decibels at, I think, 30 centimeters at idle from Oakville and Caledon. I would suggest that Oakville and Caledon are not good examples at all to emulate. They are not dense urban cities like we are. They do not have miles of high-rise buildings that echo sound all the way down Yonge Street or along King Street, whatever. This is not a good example. I think we can do better than them. I think we have to do better than them. We have a bigger population. We obviously have more cyclists and a more stress in our lives from the daily living that is existing in a bucolic place like Caledon, for instance. The presentation said earlier the industry standard was used, and the industry standard that's in the section 3.6 is that the engine will be idling and the decibel meter will be 20 centimeters from the exhaust, and it should not make more than 92 decibels. Well, I would suggest first of all 92 decibels is already very loud and much too loud. This industry standard is referring to is the Society of Automotive Engineers. There is another standard, American Motorcycle Association, which has a lower standard, which is for street legal motorcycles. And it's been referred to in one of these submissions, and that is the standard we should be using. And I've just discovered, I believe it's 85 decibels. Our submission would like it reduced to 90 decibels. But the biggest problem with this standard is that the engine is idling when it's being measured. An engine at idle doesn't make any sound. It's virtually quiet. So for an engine that register 92 decibels at idle would probably have to be a Molson Indy race car at idle. Normal motorcycles only develop noise when they're running. You have to use a motorcycle, or you have to rev the engine to make a bit of power, to make a bit of noise. So we find it's completely unrealistic to suggest that the measure be stopped at idle because any motorcycle could probably pass this test at idle. We suggest that the test be administered at 2,000 RPM, minimum 2,000 RPM. The engine's already running, obviously, in order to idle it. So the bylaw officer would ask the owner of the motorcycle, give me 2,000 RPM. It's a manual transmission. All motorcycles are. They have tachometers. The owner would comply. The bylaw officer would measure it, and we'd know if it complies or not with the bylaw. This is a safe procedure. Engine's in neutral. The bike is stopped. The owner is there. He is going to give the engine some gas and make the engine produce a bit of revolution, at least 2,000, and then it can be measured. Second, the standard of 92 decibels is still, that's very loud. I would note that two other submissions in here, EC 3.612 is suggesting a standard of 82 decibels A, considering that 80 decibels is the approximate level from standard equipment supplied by major motorcycle companies and supported by the American Motorcycle Association. So I would suggest dropping at least from 92 to 80 decibels as per the American Motorcycle Association. I note another submission, which would be EC 3.6.17, yes, it is 17, suggests the standard be dropped to 82 decibels. So just a little bit higher than what, actually exactly the same as what 3.6.12 is suggested. So my comments are, first, we're glad you're regulating motorcycles. We don't think the procedure right now will be effective at all because the engines will be idling, they will not be revving, and the standard of sound is much too loud. So we would like to see paragraph 30 for a minute to read, add a provision prohibiting sound from a motorcycle if it emits any sound exceeding 90 dBA, open discussion, it could be 80, from the exhaust outlet as measured at 50 centimeters while the motorcycle engine is at 2,000 RPM. So 50 centimeters is about that. It's pretty close, but nonetheless, it should be measured properly.
You've got 10 seconds, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
I appreciate the work you're doing, and I hope it succeeds, and I would welcome any questions.
Thank you, sir.
Especially from an experienced motorcycle rider, sir.
Okay, there are questions of Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much for your deputation. With respect to your revised suggestion for the clause number 34, has this information been made available to staff yet? And staff has seen it? Okay, thank you.
As far as I know, yeah.
We've had some challenges with exactly what you're describing in terms of when to measure, how to measure, the market motorcycle and then the aftermarket experience once the baffle is removed. Who do you believe should be enforcing that?
Well, I definitely think the city should be enforcing it.
The city meaning MLS staff?
Yes. I mean, as you
Toronto,
just...
Yeah, so Toronto Police, because it's always, because this is a moving object, this is not stationary.
I'm glad you mentioned removing the baffles, Councillor, because that's one of the easiest things motorcycle owners do. It's a simple bolt in the tailpipe, they undo the bolt, they pull out the baffles, and they got a free flow exhaust, and it's like way too loud for anybody to live with. And it's antisocial, and it destroys cafe life, it's bad for health, especially in residential neighborhoods. But I do think that municipal licensing staff should be obviously equipped with decibel meters, as they are in other jurisdictions. They need them to measure, and there should be sufficient fines, obviously. I don't know if that's yet to come in this process, Mr. Chair, the recommendation of fines or enforcement, or if that is a part of the second part of the process when it goes to council. I was not aware.
So sorry, sir. You actually can't ask questions, but I think you have asked a question. I think that staff has heard them, and so maybe we can chat offline when we're done.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Are there any further questions? Okay, none. Seeing none. Our next deputant is Max Moore. Mr. Moore? Hello, Mr. Moore. Good afternoon. Thank you for spending the day with us. Let me know when you're ready, sir. You have 5 minutes, sir. Okay, thank you.
Congratulations for all this effort you're making to update the noise policy. It's a huge task, but as somebody in one of the public consultations said, noise management is for the 21st century what cigarette smoking policies were in the, it's a lot of discussion. It's going to take years to get it right. And my name is Max Moore. I'm an audio engineer. My overall impression of the noise policy is it's going in the right direction, but it still needs some fine-tuning. I wouldn't rush into approving it because there's still quite a few problems. There are two specifically that I would like to address, and they both have to do with noise measurement. I've put a graph on the wall. Do you know about decibels? You know, we've been talking about decibels because this whole policy is being implemented on the basis of decibels. Do you understand the difference between, there are different types of decibels, and there are dBA decibels, dBc decibels, and now there's a new one coming along, dBz decibels. And I know you guys are in the middle of this, sorting out which decibels to use, and believe me, I work in the field, and I was confused for a long time, but the bad news is that you're still using dBA decibels and dBc decibels. Those are so last century, let's say. Noise measurement technology is a lot like automobile technology. You know, we drive our cars now, we see a screen, the map talks to us, everything. All those things have come along in the last 10 years. It's the same with noise measurement technology. The field is advancing rapidly. The new way of measuring noise, which is better than dBA or dBc, is dBz. I've written a letter. It's got details about dBz, why dBz is the new way of measuring noise, and it's better than dBA or dBc. You can see on the graph, the left-hand side slopes down. That's the base end of the spectrum. That's dB, the curve that goes down the farthest, that's dBA decibels, and basically dBA decibels do not measure bass. If you're using a noise meter that measures dBA decibels, you're not measuring half of the noise. That's why the new policy should not be based on dBA decibels. Up until now, we've been recommending dBc because it's better than dBA decibels. But you'll see it also has a lapse, a cutback on the base end. So dBA decibels, dBc decibels are both poor measures of measuring noise. What you want to use is dBz decibels, which are flat, what they call no adjustment decibels. It measures the whole noise, it tells the whole story, and quite frankly, it's the only measure of noise that's honest. If you're using dBA decibels, you're reporting the decibels in a dishonest way. If you're using dBc, it's a little better, but it's still dishonest. It's not the full measure of noise. If you want the full measure of noise, an accurate measure of noise, and one that makes sense for all applications, please update the policy to use dBz decibels. Now, I'll tell you why this is a problem, because the problem is, I'm an audio engineer, and I'm the guy who mixes sound at concerts and festivals, so I'm a noisemaker. I have a pro-industry, noise-making industry bias. On the other hand, I live very near the Island Airport, which is a noisemaker, and I suffer from the noise that the airport makes, so I got very involved in how do we prove that we're suffering with the airport? We measure the noise. Getting into measuring the noise at the airport is just a quagmire. We went through dBA, dBc. How do we measure it? The airport was using dBA, reporting their decibels. Very underreported noise. Basically, they're only reporting half of the noise that they're making if they're using dBA decibels. We have convinced them to start using dBz decibels, so progress is being made, and I would recommend that your whole group look at dBz decibels, get into it, change this whole policy. Because if you want people to communicate with the same language when measuring decibels, you really have to have one measure which is accurate and valid for all applications. And it's just a matter of changing the number. I'll give you one example. Page 3, where you're doing definitions, number definition 5, definition of dBA. Definition 6, dBc. You just have to add a seventh one, dBz is, you know, it's that easy. And then throughout the policy, wherever it says dBA, dBc, you're going to have to find a dBz
wrap up, please,
equivalent.
sir.
And I guess that's my whole point. And the whole story is in that graph. If you want to find out the better decibel, there it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There might be questions for you, sir.
Oh, yeah.
Just sit for a moment. Are there any questions? Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, sir. Our next speaker is Nancy Musik? Okay, thank you. Nancy Musik, thank you very much, and good afternoon. You'll have 5 minutes to speak, ma'am, and just let me know when you're ready. I'll start your time. The clock is just to your left there.
Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
This thing. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My concern is regarding sections 38 to 41 of the proposed amendments relating to residential air conditioners. I am concerned and disappointed that section 38 only sets out decibel A sound limits for residential air conditioners. The proposed regulations for amplified sounds in section 25 and section 26 have broader constraints that include a limit for decibel C and lower acceptable levels for the sleeping hours of 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Why does the sound from residential air conditioners have less constraints than amplified noise? Air conditioners run 24/7 for months during the height of the summer. That means no escape from noise day and night. I am requesting that a level of decibel C, and now based on this kind person over here, maybe even decibel Z, be set out for residential air conditioners that is not to be exceeded, and that a lower maximum noise level be set for sleeping hours. I'm also requesting that the noise from residential air conditioners be measured relative to the ambient sound, and that allowable noise not be more than, say, 5 decibel A and decibel C louder than the ambient noise. Section 26 lists a maximum decibel A of 45 under certain conditions for amplified noise between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. Why would the allowable noise from an air conditioner be allowed to be greater? The ambient noise in my home at 9 p.m. on April the 1st was measured at lower than 40 decibel A. When the warm weather starts, the high-pitched whine heard inside my home from my neighbor's air conditioner will be noticeably greater than the ambient noise. Also, in the current bylaw 591(2), under a general prohibition, it states, "No person shall make, cause, or permit noise or vibration at any time which is likely to disturb the quiet, peace, rest, enjoyment, comfort, or convenience of the inhabitants of the city." The new proposed section 41 has removed the term vibration as a concern and has replaced the specific descriptions of quiet, peace, rest, enjoyment, comfort, and convenience with the much less specific unreasonable noise, which I presume is subject to interpretation and therefore has questionable enforcement. I am asking that you leave old bylaw 591(2) as it is and not replace it with the weaker rules of section 41. The vibration caused by a working air conditioner mounted on the ground or on metal braces is real and noticeable and disturbing. Please restore vibration as a prohibition and return to the more specific, less ambiguous descriptions of harm caused by noise. I've lived in my home in Sunny Lee for 25 years, and it's a dream home for my husband and me. The large commercial-grade air conditioner that was recently installed facing 3 feet from my wall has created an existential dilemma for us, and we've lived with the distressing possibility that we may have to sell our home due to the noise. I am asking the City of Toronto to enact noise bylaws that protect residents from decibel A, decibel C, throw in decibel Z, and vibrations generated from residential air conditioners. I shouldn't have to sell my home because laws protect one neighbor's convenience at the expense of causing harm and disadvantage to others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation. Our next speaker is Grant Humes, Toronto Financial District BIA. Mr. Humes, you're no stranger to this committee. Welcome. Good to see you, and good afternoon.
Hello.
I just have one name here, and there are 2 of you, so if you could make...
I'll provide an introduction. Don't worry about that. Yeah, great. Thank you. So thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson, councillors, for the opportunity to speak today. I'm joined by my colleague, Amy Harrell. Amy worked on with our stakeholders in the city on this file. She's probably forgotten more than I ever knew on it, so I just brought some help in case there's hard questions. I've met all of you. I know you understand the importance of our district to the city, and also the fact that it's got some unique challenges associated with it. And I'm really here to speak about that today. So as an organization, we focus on working with our partners to make things better for all stakeholders in the financial district. So that's properties, businesses, employees, and visitors. I'm speaking to you on this issue today because in the process of revising the noise bylaw, there's been an unintended consequence for business that we have to address. As a bit of history, our BIA has worked with tenants, properties, and city staff since inception to address the problem of street noise that interferes with the operation of businesses in the area. A common example is the person who sets up drums at the corner of Front and Bay. The noise from the drums is amplified by the buildings and reverberates all throughout area offices, way above standard levels. Bylaw enforcement staff have advised us in the past that the current bylaw only allows inhabitants, defined as residents of Toronto, to make noise complaints. As interpreted by enforcement staff, this meant a person who resided at the source of the complaint. So effectively, a business tenant or commercial property representative was not in a position to make a complaint that results in a citation. They advised that the noise bylaw review was an ideal time to address this issue. In February 2019, RBIA facilitated a consultation with city staff and financial district property managers to discuss this question and other noise concerns. It was agreed that businesses and tenants needed the ability to issue complaints. This has been addressed in the revised bylaw by focusing on the source of noise or the point of reception. However, we identified during the consultation and in our follow-up letter to staff that there's a significant unintended consequence. This is related to construction activity internal to commercial buildings. In office towers, the terms of a lease require tenant builds and retrofits to occur overnight and on weekends to minimize interference with other businesses in the building. Under the revised bylaw, tenants working after business hours will now be able to complain to the city about other tenant builds and retrofits that are being conducted according to the terms of the lease. This concern has not been addressed in the review and is likely to result in significant impact on businesses, commercial properties, and city resources. As we note in our letter to the committee, exemption permits are challenging, as it is the nature of buildings to have several projects going on concurrently. There are a limited number of contractors authorized to work in these buildings, and often scheduling decisions are made at the last minute. So ideally, we're seeking revision to the bylaw with an exclusion that would allow for interior work to a strictly commercial building to occur between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. and on weekends as per current business practices, or an alternate solution we can come up with that can be arrived at that meets the needs. While we respect the statement made in the staff presentation of enforcement's intent to treat this concern as a tenant-to-tenant issue, this is not clear in the bylaw. It appears to us that business tenants would have recourse to remedy these complaints through the city. So we'd be pleased to work with city staff as needed to find a reasonable solution in the form of an amendment in advance of this going to council. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Humes. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Our next speaker is Steve Daniels from Build. Okay? All right, thank you. Part of the coalition of Build. Our next speaker is Martin Millistrad. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is, as you mentioned, is Martin Middlestead. I'm a member of the Toronto Island Noise Committee. I'm here for our chair who wasn't well enough to attend. We've been active on the harbour for about 25 years, and we've had a lot of success having a kind of a decent soundscape in the harbour. We've worked well with MLS, but we have some concerns, a major concern with these proposals. What we face are several hundred concerts and party boat trips every summer. The majority of the operators on the harbor are decent folks, and they don't cause undue noise, but there's a significant minority who do. And the way that these amendments are structured, it'll make it very difficult for us to work with MLS to stop the bad operators. Currently, party boats don't have a set routine. It's not like every day at 5 o'clock, party boat A will come by and disturb you. They might be there at 1 o'clock in the morning. They might be there on Sunday, but not on Friday. And it doesn't work with phoning 311 and having a noise inspector come. In essence, we believe that the way that this proposal is structured, it'll make it impossible to have any action taken against the bad actors on the waterfront. Now, we believe that the proposal should be tabled so that we can work with MLS, as many of the other people have suggested, to try to correct some of these deficiencies. But the main error or problem that we see is that in 591 2.b, it gives amplified sound an exemption from the general provision of the bylaws. And the general provision is the part of the bylaw that says that neighbors should be protected from noise 24/7. Currently, amplified sound will be exempted, and it gets, not only affects people like us with our party boats and that sort of thing, it's the neighbor-on-neighbor issues as well that now will seem to have an exemption as well. We think that that's wrong. The way that the wording or the bylaw is proposed, it's going to require bylaw officers with devices measuring the various types of decibels to get an enforcement action. Currently, we have the ability, or residents have the ability to make noise logs, and those are records of the people who are disturbing us and have those used as evidence against the bad actors. If everything is placed on the noise bylaw officers with their measuring devices, that will exclude the ability of residents to take action on their own that helps build a case against the people who are causing noise on the waterfront. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation. Are there any questions for the deputant? Okay, seeing none, sir, we have a question for you. Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you to the deputant, I actually never thought that never brought my attention to that being an issue with party boats to people on the Toronto Island. Is it repeat offenders? Is it companies who are on the waterfront, or is it?
There are generally good actors and bad actors, and some of the boats that cause a lot of trouble, some days they don't, some days they're fairly quiet, but generally there's a pattern. The problem is it's, we don't know if they'll be sailing tonight at 7 or at 9. How do you line up a bylaw officer with the decibel meter if you don't know when they're going to be there? And they might be there for an hour or two at night, and then they go, right? So that your ability to track that through a bylaw enforcement officer is limited.
Mm-hmm. Are there, through you, Mr. Chair, are there any best practices you have seen out there? I don't have a big body of water around my ward, so I don't hear complaints such as that, but.
Some of the operators are members of a tour group association on the harborfront, and they follow best practices, which is that they typically don't have screaming DJs. They typically don't have extremely loud bass at night, and they follow those practices. Others, unfortunately, don't.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, sir. Our final speaker or deputant is Spencer Sutherland. Mr. Sutherland? You have 5 minutes. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. I know it's a long day. I'm Spencer Sutherland. I'm a resident and a father of 2 kids, but perhaps better known as the most recent co-chair of the Toronto Music Advisory Council, and also a director of Tabia for the past 8 years. So I just wanted to say that noise is a very challenging issue, especially for a city as big and fast-growing as Toronto. I don't think there is such a thing as a perfect set of bylaws. Certainly, no city has yet seemed to find them. But I'm impressed with the work done by staff. I think that we have before us a pretty workable set of laws that balance the needs of residents and industry, and could provide a good basis for us moving forward. So I hope that it's been a long and arduous process, and I hope we don't have to go back to the table again. I think that what we do have is a good basis. It might need some tweaking, but overall I think it's very good. The only one omission that I would draw some attention to is around ambient noise. I thought there was some discussion that there was going to be a decibel over the ambient noise to be part of the recommendation, and I didn't see that here. So that's maybe something to consider. I thought it was going to be 6 decibels over the ambient noise. But other than that, I think we have a very good set of bylaws. And that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mrs. Sutherland? Okay, seeing none. Members, we'll now just take this in, so questions of staff. Are there any members, visiting councillors, questions of staff? Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, thank you very much. My questions are, I'm going to try to squeeze them in, are going to be focused around amplified sound, construction, and motor vehicles. With respect to the section around the amendments changes proposed for amplified sound, there is some language about measuring from a point of reception and perhaps when it's not reasonable to do so. Can you please clarify of what would constitute reasonable? And who would determine that, and is there an appeal process if someone determines that it wasn't a reasonable decision?
Through the chair to Councillor Wong-Tam. So our first approach would be, if we had a noise complaint about amplified sound, would be to measure from the exterior of the building of where the person resides. However, if they live in a multi-story condominium tower and they're complaining about noise from a rooftop patio, us measuring at the street level at the facade is not going to be an accurate reflection of what noise is impacting them. And noise, the way it works, is very complex. It can reflect off of other surfaces. So that's why we're saying, if need be, then we would go and measure at the point of reception, whether it's if they have a balcony, we would measure from their balcony, because we want to make sure, you know, they can enjoy their outdoor living space as well. And if they don't have a balcony, then we would measure from the plane of the window inside their unit.
And when would the bylaw, the provincial fence officer have be able to respond to that complaint? Because oftentimes the noise may be emanating late at night. Most people are not complaining during the day. It's when they want to go to sleep. What type of response can we expect if a complaint does come in?
Right. So
if time deployed.
So if it's a one-time event and they complain just on a one-time event, in all honesty, we're not going to get there. We're not immediate first responders. But if it's an ongoing, reoccurring problem, then we will have our officers there at the time the noise is occurring, and we will do our investigations then. So if they say the noise is occurring at 11 o'clock at night, our officers will be there at 11 o'clock at night to do that measurement. But if it's, like, I just want to be clear to manage expectations. You call once because somebody made noise at 2 in the morning, we're not going to have officers there.
But if it's a repeat offender at 2 o'clock in the morning, you will be able to get there.
Yes.
With respect to, and this is probably a global question around the decibels measured A, B, A, C, and Z, why is there no reflection of the Z measurement in the recommendations?
This is the first time we're hearing of that Z decibel. We've engaged with our consultants on this numerous times. We've been dealing with this matter for numerous years. I'll be honest, that's the first time I'm hearing a reference to it. I understand, I'm not a noise expert, but from what I've learned, the A decibel is what it's adjusted for human hearing. It's measuring what the human ear would hear. C is what I described as the bass or structure-borne sound, so that's what you're feeling. Z, I have no idea what that is.
Okay. Would you be agreeable to taking the submissions from Mr. Moore to do some deeper work before this item goes to council?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Will you be open to taking the submission from Mr. Moore, who is a subject matter expert from what I can tell, and making sure that that his recommendation will be reflected in any substantial changes before it goes to council?
Sure, we'll take a look at it closely. I spoke with Max after his deputation. I just want to reiterate what Mark said, that there were 5 different acoustical engineers involved in this. So we'll check with our experts on that and how Z could be incorporated if it can. And I just want to go back a little bit to the response times. Again, it's a body of work we're doing. I'm not sure if you heard our presentation on Monday. We spoke about priority responses, and there are different levels, and we are continuing to work on those to improve our response times.
Thank you. I do have a couple more questions. I'm going to try to get them in. We'll have shorter answers. With respect to noise mitigation strategies, will municipal and government-related work be also subject to that requirement?
It's not required through the bylaw, but our colleagues in engineering construction services and that work that they monitor and manage, same as Toronto Water Transportation Services, they already adopt those practices.
That's the first I've heard of that. That's good to know.
Last question.
Yes, motor vehicles. With respect to the baffles being removed from motorcycles and you have the aftermarket performance and how it impacts the local community, would it not be easier for us to simply request to which order of government is responsible to not allow for aftermarket modifications, which includes the removal of baffle, which is generally whose sole purpose is to generate as much noise as possible, rather than trying to figure out when to measure if a motorcycle is idle, if the RPM hits 2,000, it seems if we get it upstream, we won't have to deal with it downstream.
So maybe legal can answer that. I think staff's pointing to legal.
Well, I'll start and then Corey or Lisa can chime in, but the rules right now are pulled from the Highway Traffic Act. That's where they are, so it is the provincial area. If legal wants to supplement that.
So just specifically to the question of can we ask the legislature to do something?
We already
Absolutely.
have asked, but.
Yes, and we could ask again. The legislature could, of course, impose or make the changes necessary.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Layton, question?
Yes, thank you very much. The first question, I'm going to get to enforcement eventually, but I found it, and we were getting a lot of questions from residents because the way that the recommendations are laid out is just a bit confusing. It's not if you just read the bylaw. If you just read the articles of the bylaw, it sheds a little bit of light here. One though that I was still kind of confused about is the definition of unreasonable noise. So the second part of the definition is that it does not include commonplace housework or workplace sounds such as furniture being moved, children playing, or people engaging in conversation. Now, how do we distinguish that from unreasonable noise as a result of a licensed establishment? That it's not amplified noise that the problem could be. It's the interaction of patrons and staff, interaction between patrons in an outdoor space that gets, you know how alcohol kind of turns up the decibel point by 4. You know what I mean? How do we distinguish? Is there a way of distinguishing between the two? Or no?
Through the chair, I'll take a stab at it. It's an interesting point. I mean, the concept around changing what we've talked about as the general provision is to add some better ability to enforce it. It takes a little bit of the subjectivity away from it and brings it into an unreasonable and continuous noise that would be bothersome. It would require an investigation, and not all cases are the same. Your example of loud groups in the street, for example, after they've been drinking, again, that's a noise that is bothersome to people. We totally understand that. Again, from an investigation standpoint, for a noise bylaw.
Impossible to investigate.
Impossible to investigate and impossible to hold a group of 60 people responsible. What we would do is work with our partners, with AGCO, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, who have jurisdiction over licensed premises, have conditions that relate to they're patrons of a licensed establishment, working with them on conditions on the license and actions that they could take, and also with the Toronto Police Service.
So you'll have to excuse me. I have absolutely zero faith that the AGCO will do anything to support our efforts at reining in licensed establishments. After years of trying to work with them around conditions on licensing, and they continue to fail us on this. Yep. I just want to make sure Councillor Cressy heard the answer to that last question. On the notion of enforcement, there is now, I guess there was before, but is now what's being proposed, there is a fine schedule for noise enforcement for, let's say again, on the entertainment industry side, when restaurants and bars are in breach for amplified noise, correct? And now, how is that different? How is it different now than it was before?
Sorry, through the chair. So currently, the noise bylaw, the maximum fine is $5,000 under the Provincial Offences Act. We are proposing, under the City of Toronto Act, to increase the maximum fine amount allowable to $100,000. So when the courts are deciding or considering the fine amount once a guilty verdict is rendered on a noise violation, they're now looking at a larger maximum, so they realize that the significance and the ability to impose a higher penalty is there, as well as through this process, we also have what's called set fines, where we issue tickets to a person on the spot. Currently, those set fines range from $155 to $305.
Peanuts, essentially.
So we would be seeking, and there's a maximum amount allowed under that process, but we'll be seeking through the courts to have that set fine amount increased as well to reflect this, the impact of this. But we would use those tickets only in certain instances where it's a homeowner maybe doing something, but where we have businesses that are knowingly and willingly violating the bylaw, then we would go through what was called the Part 3 or a summons to court process, where the maximum fine amounts are then in place.
See, I would argue that it just takes too long to go through that. Might I just add that don't you look sharp in that uniform?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ford, the question. You can have a second round if you'd like. I'm just saying. Councillor Ford?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to preface my questions with thanking staff for such an in-depth report and the amount of information they've put in here and the time that's taken. I'd just like to thank them for that. So I'd like to start off my questions. Actually, one of our first deputants made mention of it, I think Mr. Smith, around adequate staffing. And my first question is, what has been municipal licensing and standards capacity to respond to issues of noise complaints in the city to date?
So I'll start and let my colleagues who manage the enforcement weigh in as well. We have staff in two different areas: investigation services, who deal with noise on private property, and then we have bylaw enforcement, which is noise related to bars and restaurants, the amplified sound pieces. And then we actually have a third piece where animal services on dog barking, etc. So we have, the total number is 235 officers. This is one of 30 plus bylaws that they enforce. We are looking at prioritizing, we are looking at doing things different so that we are providing adequate responses to these issues, because they are an issue in your communities.
Mm-hmm. And well, I think you started to answer my second question. Is what is the forecast after, or if the new bylaw is accepted at council and passed? What is the forecasted, I guess, demand on MLS coming out of these changes?
It doesn't actually change. Over the last 5 years, we've had 11,000 complaints per year. It has been pretty consistent. What we're doing is, again, trying to implement a priority model whereby we're getting to the repeat offenders, the ones that will really make the biggest impact on the community, and going less to the one-offs and more to the ones that are repeat, and making sure we're focused on those.
Okay, and maybe to that point, I can jump to that question. On page 13 of the report, through you, Mr. Chair, the noise complaint graph, from 2017 to 2018, it's about an 18 to 20, estimating about an 18% jump in noise complaints. Is there a rhyme or reason to that increase?
Through the chair to the councillor, some of this change in the numbers was because of the manner in which the data was collected. So there used to be a point in time where if multiple people phoned in to complain about a noise issue, it would be only captured as one, and we had that corrected because in order to judge the impact of an issue, we needed to know how many people were calling in. So now if 10 people call in to complain about the same noise issue, it's being captured 10 times, or if 100 people, because we found that we were missing, for instance, we were getting noise complaints about the island airport during construction. When we looked at our records, we only had a couple of complaints, when in fact there was hundreds of people calling in. So it helps to ensure that when we're looking at an issue, we know the magnitude and the scope of the impact.
Okay. And I'd like to jump to the work you have done preparing this report in terms of community consultations. I can only assume that you hear different feedback from different areas of the city, such as a community in North Etobicoke may have different concerns regarding the noise bylaw than residents in downtown Toronto. Is there a list of what you have gathered from those public consultations?
On our public consultation website, we typically post summaries of what we heard, so it may be there. During our discussions, we did have this looking at different parts of the city, North Etobicoke, Northeast Scarborough versus downtown, and whether we should have different rules for different parts of the city because ambient levels are different. In the end, we did not do that. We went with a citywide model. I believe attachment E of the report puts the summary of some of the consultations.
Okay. Mr. Chair, do I have one more question?
Last question.
Yeah, and it is my last question. Through you to staff. So what is the difference, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Toronto Police do not respond to noise complaints. And if that is accurate, what is the relationship in how MLS will deal with complaints that are, noise complaints that are quite bothersome to a community?
Through the chair to the councillor. So yes, part of the Toronto Police transformation exercise that was been going on is it was identified that having police services respond to a noise complaint is not a policing matter, and it best lies with MLS. So we've been working with them and implemented this last year that any noise complaints, if anybody called Toronto Police, they would be directed to call 311. So that frees up police resources to do what they should be doing, which is policing matters. If there's an activity or an event going on that has a public safety impact, whether it be a large house party. I know, Councillor, you called me last year. There was a large party in a park that was unsanctioned. Toronto Police will respond to those because that's their role as community and public safety. And if there's a noise issue, we will deal with the impacts of the noise that it's having and who are the creators of that noise. So we will go jointly at times, and obviously we let the police go first for the safety of the people and our officers, but there's sort of a drawing line is please deal with the safety of the community and we'll deal with the noise impacts on the community.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you. So questions around the general prohibition. So previously, my understanding was we didn't have the new decibel limits, they didn't exist before. There was this general prohibition related to any unreasonable and persistent noise. So why the rationale to withdraw that general prohibition, and how did we determine the decibel limit that's proposed?
So firstly, it wasn't withdrawn. It was, we kind of transfer it to another section where it's called unreasonable and repetitive. Persistent, not repetitive, persistent. The decibel levels, so again, what was happening was anything unlikely to disturb could be my voice right now, and that was really subjective, and we felt it needed to be more objective, so we put it in the other category, and then we created the decibel levels, which I believe is 65 to 85.
Just for clarity, I think there's been confusion with the existing noise bylaw. We have restrictions by time and place. So for instance, amplified sound is not allowed at any time to project beyond the property line, which in reality is impossible. Then we said certain other types of noise, we regulate construction noise by hours of day, when you can make noise, when you can't. We looked at that, and when we looked at some of the issues, especially on amplified sound, we would get complaints about noise, but it wasn't about the volume or the intensity of the noise, it was about the type of sound, the music being played. So we wanted to take that subjectivity out of the equation, put in meaningful and reasonable quantifiable measures. So that's why we adopted the noise, the decibel levels that we're proposing. And when we looked at other municipalities, that's what they do. And again, because subjectivity is difficult in a court of law to say, yeah, I didn't like the music, it was too loud. Well, how loud's too loud? So we've established now a measurable level that we can go in with our sound meters, with our officers' evidence, not the public or the person being impacted, because that's under the old bylaw how it would work at times, which is not fair to them to put them in that position. And again, to ensure we have more consistent, better enforcement. Sorry.
All right. So the proposal to bring in the decibel measure is so to take the subjectivity out, but to allow us to enforce it in theory around the
consistently enforce it.
So talk to me about, in terms of the decibel noise, how we distinguish bass. Because as a downtown councillor, it is more the bass than the music itself. So how do we take into account that bass? We talk about in construction vibrations, and I know we talk about that here. I do not know the difference between dBz and dB. Max knows all that. But how do we take into account bass? Because that is what I hear more than anything else.
So that's what the dBc level measures. So with our noise meters set to measure dBc, which is the bass type of sound, we have established the parameter of what that maximum decibel level is, which is 60 dBc at night and 65 dBc during the day. So if we get a complaint and we hear with our own ears, or we sense that it's a base level, or we would measure for both A and C, we'll be able to address those types of noise sources.
Can I?
And our current bylaw does not allow us to do that at all.
I guess from a mixed-use downtown perspective, where we place what you're proposing is a reasonable cap on the noise transfer that's allowed by virtue of a decibel limit, the enforcement model, I mean, it doesn't work, right? And I think, like, calling to say, come out at 2 a.m. and every Saturday at 2 a.m. and then you have to stay up until 2 a.m. to let a bylaw officer into your house. So in other sectors, we have automated enforcement we look at with cameras and others, and we talk about why no opportunity in high problematic areas where we know we get a consistency of complaints to not have a model of automated enforcement, as opposed to the expectation of having a bylaw officer come out at 3 a.m. because we frequently hear the party boats during 4 months of the year at that time on that day.
Last question.
So in regards to that, there's a couple of different aspects that go into investigating a noise complaint. So first of all, we have to identify if it exceeds the permitted levels or outside the hours permitted. But then we have to be able to articulate, if we get into court, and the source of it. So if we have a multitude of possible sources, we have to be able to try and articulate and distinguish why we believe this was the source of that music that's being heard, for instance. And so it's not just, I don't believe it's something that we can automate in that regard, because it will require other investigative techniques. Measuring noise level is just one, but then identifying and being able to say, based upon this evidence, this is the establishment that was creating that noise or that music.
Thank you very much. Okay, so speakers. Councillor Wong Tam, visiting member committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank
Councillor, can I just ask you to just hold for a moment, please? We don't have quorum. Oh, Councillor Carroll, oh, you were there. Okay, I didn't see you. That's okay. You can, Councillor Carroll, you can say that if you wish. I didn't see you. It's okay. No worries. Okay. All right. So if you conclude, okay, Councillor, thank you. I know it this time.
Okay,
We'll have to do it over again.
Thank
Councillor, you may begin.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the quick recovery, everyone. I want to thank the deputants for taking the time, energy, and also bringing your talents and also sharing your feedback. I know for many of you, this has been a very long and arduous journey. You have been extremely patient, members from the community, members from the different industries that are represented today, and I think that our journey is almost coming to a conclusion. I do recognize that some of the comments and additional feedback was that you're not 100% satisfied with where we have landed so far. But I also want to just acknowledge that I know that staff have worked incredibly hard over the last 3-4 years of trying to navigate the cacophony of opinions out there, deal with a bylaw that had not really been substantially updated since 2003, it had been tinkered with in 2010. I had asked for a comprehensive review of Chapter 591 in 2013. This has been, for me personally, almost a 6.5-year journey. I don't think that we should delay too much longer. I do think that it's important for us to perhaps work together, and I know Councillor Cressy is feeling the same way, is to probably do more work between now and the time Council meets to make a final decision to make sure that every last comment that was brought out today is going to be given a bit more consideration, whether it's dialogue with the stakeholders one more time or perhaps just reviewing the correspondence and the deputations that were received today. And I want to say thank you to everyone who's been involved with this process. I recognize that noise, especially as a downtown resident, I have lived with noise and ambient noise all my life. I've never not lived in the downtown, to be quite honest. And I also recognize that the level and the volume over the years has significantly risen, and the construction impacts layered on top of that with the volume of human activity and the mixed-use environment that we want to foster in the core and beyond. As we move to a higher densification area, it is going to create conflicts. But the tools that we've had so far have been woefully inadequate. And I think that if I'm correct, I think that's what staff are trying to do here. Give yourselves the empowerment tools so you can go off and do some active and perhaps reactive enforcement. Asking community members, as I have, and I know every single councillor has had this very embarrassing moment, is to ask people to keep a noise log. Tell us when it's taking place. It's 20th century. And then not being able to enforce it because the fines are just so modest that developers and other large contractors just factored into the cost of doing business is another loophole that we have not been able to close. So I do want to thank staff for this body of work, and I think it's critically important that we do land on it sometime between now and the time of council. I don't think it's ever going to be entirely perfect, but I am largely satisfied that we're getting to where we need to go. One final push. I'm going to ask you for your final bit of patience from the community. Thank you for all that you've done. I think we're almost there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. All right. Councillor Cressy, take this into committee. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Chair, and I have a motion that can be placed, which I'll speak to. First of all, a tremendous thank you to staff for years and years and years of work. Just make sure that motion is placed. And I want to thank our deputants, not just for speaking today, but for those who participated in 7 working group meetings and more. And I think while an update to the noise bylaw is long overdue, we need to get it right. And so between now and council, I think it is incumbent on us to roll up our sleeves, to work with the stakeholders based on what we've seen here today, to ensure that we do tweak this where necessary to get it right. Noise is a quality of life issue, as it is also a public health issue. And it is, as we've heard, exceptionally complex. Construction, nightlife, vehicles, leaf blowers and air conditioners, dogs, I mean, everything. And I approach this from a citywide perspective, but critically as one of the three downtown councillors from a downtown perspective, which is we have developed a mixed-use downtown core, which means that it is not a 24/7 entertainment district, but nor is it a Sleepy Hollow. And so while downtown is not devoid of sound, the expectation cannot be unreasonable disturbance. And so it is finding that balance. Now, I can tell you in my personal experience that the existing system does not work. And I can tell you, I live downtown, that every Friday and Saturday night between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., I am woken up every Friday and Saturday night at minimum 4 times. Councillor Layton, who is my local councillor, knows all about this, because as a constituent, I have emailed his office because of 3 local establishments. And I have filled out more noise complaints than I can count, and I have made more phone calls than I can count as an individual through 311 in the whole system. And if the expectation is that we're going to have a bylaw officer come to my house at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night to identify the source and to start, it's not going to work. And so my concern here, I have to tell you, is on the monitoring and the enforcement. And so I want to look to ways to strengthen that, both from my personal experience, but also from that which I've heard from my constituents. And so I will just say that in the path ahead, we need a new noise bylaw. Nobody wants to be, a year from now still kicking around on this. Residents deserve it. Our stakeholders in the business community deserve it. But I think between now and council, let us roll up our sleeves and get over the finish line together. As much as I am surprised when I joined the Community Economic Development Committee that this was also the licensing committee, given, I'm not kidding, I was like, given the...
Throw everything at us.
Throw everything at us.
We can manage.
Given, coming back to the fact that sound is a quality of life issue, it's a public health issue, and it is also an economic issue. It makes sense to me that community and economics are coming together on this, and let's get over the finish line in a couple weeks, and that's the spirit of my motion to help us tweak it to get there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Cressy. Any questions for Councillor on this motion? It's pretty clear. Okay, Councillor Ford to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I would start by saying I think the Etobicoke North is a little more of a Sleepy Hollow than our downtown hustle and bustle nightlife.
You can come over for a sleepover any Saturday night.
I will happily. We don't have party boats going down the Humber River, so I don't deal with that.
Not yet.
Not yet. But needless to say, I want to thank staff for the work that they have done on this, and even though I've only been on council for about 3 years now, understanding the context of what we're looking at has gone back a number of years. I want to thank them for such a report. I think they've done some great work, and I think also our staff's commitment to consulting the public, I know across our city, goes very much noticed here, and have done really good work. As much as I, make jokes about downtown versus Sleepy Hollow and Etobicoke, we've had a number of issues as well in North Etobicoke that Mr. Stragan knows very well in my calls on a couple of things. So, and I'm pretty confident that the report in front of us and the changes to the noise bylaw will satisfy some of those concerns I have seen. But one of the things that I have heard a lot from the deputants who have come up, and they have made some very valid points on this that I think should be looked at before council. So I will absolutely be supporting Councillor Cressy's motion, as well as also doing some work in regards to the ResCon deputation, which I also take much weight to. So looking at a few things as we approach council would be very important. So I will be supporting this moving forward to council, and look forward to continuing that dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Councillor Carroll?
Yes, just quickly, I feel sometimes like I'm sort of in between downtown and suburbs, because if I look over the course of the amount of time I've served one area, it used to be if somebody wanted to expand on the the hours for construction. I would think, oh, we're going to have to warn that subdivision across the street. Whereas now, sometimes that application comes, can we work all night for 4 days because we're at that juncture in a construction site? And I realize there are now 15,000 people to notify around it. It's not just the, so you just have to, you end up having to make a unilateral decision. But I have to say this, I see the need for the noise bylaw because I've had those experiences recently. Now that we have a dense community, they are going to have to strike a balance downtown. And while we're asking for this sort of, I call them 11th hour meetings when we say let's have one more meeting before council, I don't expect that meeting to result in a change for every single person, because at the end of the day, we do have a music strategy. We have a music advisory committee that tells us we're losing venues. So, you know, not everybody's going to be completely satisfied in that regard. While we've got to do something about construction noise, we do need the units they're building. While we hate transit noise, I have a member of staff whose condominium is right on top of the crosstown construction, and she's really at her wit's end. But she needs that crosstown. So that's going to be the delicate balance that they've tried to make, and there may be 1 or 2 tweaks they can do, but we're not going to, at the 11th hour, I hope, see radical change, because we really do have to keep those directives. And there are a lot more transit sites to be built, and we will have to make our way through those. But I have to say, even before making this change, with the 235 officers, I think it was Carlton said, where we know something is coming, where I have an annual event and it's been a noise problem, I have had great attention. When it's something where we can be proactive and we can sit down and work out a solution with a stakeholder, we've had great attention from our staff thus far. Every single time, to the point where we got to about year 4 and realized it was no longer an issue and we could give them back the hours that we had to take away. And that was all them working with staff. I didn't have to meddle once they were on task. And so I'm hoping that we end up with a bylaw that allows that type of work to continue, because those are the best ways to deal with the community concern and still continue to be the music city, the growing city, the moving city, all of those things that do create some noise. And so what I'll be looking for in the 11th hour changes is that we don't quash that in the process of trying to deal with the last few issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. I will just add my voice to this issue. First and foremost, I want to thank certainly the members of the public who are here with us today, and I know that there's been many, as we've heard, public meetings and discussions. I recall a meeting that I attended at Metro Hall, and I think Spencer may have been at that meeting. It was a very large room, and it was a heated discussion and debate about noise bylaw and the changes and so on. And so what we've had here today is a proposed amendment to the bylaw, and we've had civility, which is really extremely important, obviously, as part of the process. We've heard your presentations, members of the public and those who are industry. We've heard, and we take it all very seriously. The motion that has been presented by Councillor Cressy is seeking to try to create some refinement as this matter goes to council. And I think you all understand that this is not the end of this. This will continue to be refined and so on. I've looked at my review of the New York City bylaw that I have in this particular document here, and I've looked at other places as well. I understand that theirs are not perfect either. And so we were not able to find a perfect bylaw that dealt with noise anywhere in the world. And it's an ongoing situation. And we realize all the things that people have said about, you know, the impact on our health and our well-being and so on. But also we balance that with respect to the varying interests, economic interests, and all those variables that have to be considered. And so I turn my attention now to our staff and just to say, Carlton and team and so on, and everyone who's been involved. This has been a very difficult process for the most part. It has now come to a point where I think we can see the headways in terms of coming to resolution that will help us and continue to help us to refine the process as we deal with this particular matter. I think, and I again want to stress the fact on the public, I've made notes, staff have made notes that we're listening to you. We care, we heard what you have stated. We want to address this. I lived at Harbourfront, for example, the gentleman that came and talked about the party boats. I was on the 5th floor at 7799 Queen's Quay or Harbour Square. And in fact, there were nights when it was absolutely terrible. And I couldn't call my city councillor at that time. I wasn't a member of council at that point. I couldn't call the bylaw enforcement, and we're not going to call the police because they were not going to come because they had more important things to do. And so we are mindful of that. There are other elements and the noise that the lady spoke about in terms of the air conditioning noise and so on. We are mindful of that as well. And I know that much of the regulations come from the province in terms of that regulation as such. And so this is something that's important. I have gone to some of my residents' home and just to be in their bedroom, and you would not believe the sort of concentration of the air conditioning noise. It may seem sort of, it's a matter that's, not problematic, but it's compounded by being so close. It's compounded by, the materials and so on that we build our houses with. They're not so that it's so soundproof to prevent the noise from coming through and so on. And so I think we've heard from everyone today, and we've heard that it's not perfect, but the refinement that has taken place have taken us to a point where today I believe that in supporting the motion that Councillor Cressy has put forward, going to Councillor and allowing for further discussion to take place, that will get us closer to where we need to be, but we'll always want to continue to be refining this. I think the final point I wanted to make, it's around enforcement. That will be the critical piece, because we can have all the rules and regulations and bylaws in effect, unless we actually are focusing on its enforcement. That is not going to help us unless we do that. And this notion that we want people to keep the noise log, I can't tell you how many times I've had to hold my head down and sort of talk to residents about this noise log that they thought were so inefficient, so problematic for them. In fact, they would just say, I throw my hands up, I won't be bothered with it, and so on. So this is not a perfect situation in terms of what the outcome is, but I think it balances the interests as best as we can at this time, and it's a work in progress. All right, so members, I'm going to ask for a recorded vote on this particular matter. There are 4 of us left. So, Madam Clerk.
Okay, on Councillor Cressy's motion, all those in favour? Councillor Carroll, Councillor Cressy, Councillor Thompson, and Councillor Ford. The motion carries.
Okay.
Are you moving the item as amended?
Sorry. Yes, that was the next part. And sorry, that's right. That's the word. So I move the item as amended. I'm sorry.
And we'll do a recorded
vote on that as well.
Item as amended. All those in favor, Councillor Carroll, Councillor Cressy, Councillor Thompson, and Councillor Ford. The motion passes.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Members, we have reached that point of the day. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you, and again, thank you to the clerk and the staff for the good work. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Thanks, members. Thanks, Robert.